Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna continue the series What If Naruto Gained the Knowledge of Everything Part 6, The End. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Ino rushed forward with two swords held backwards and jumped over the blonde woman with short hair who swung her own blade at her. She landed on her knees and jumped back to avoid the next attack. She jumped off the wall and charged at her, swiping her sword out of the way and giving her a kick to the chest that made her fall back. She waited a few seconds, which gave her enough time to get up. How dare she treat her badly in front of the person she loves? She would have to pay in the worst possible way. They had been fighting for a while, and she had to admit that she was pretty strong. Samui finally got back on her feet and stared at the crazy blonde on the other side. Her actions were never the same twice. Regardless of how she did Kenjutsu, she had never seen anything like it. It was very flexible and surprisingly fast. Okay ladies, Naruto said something that made everyone listen. This little spout is taking more time than I thought it would. What the hell, you're the boy's mother. He shrugged. Defend your son. Let's change things up instead. You and your son both stay alive. Dull. He told her to pay attention. Attempt to kill her. Samui quickly looked over and saw that her child's tag was on fire. She didn't waste any time getting back into the fight. The Raikage put his hand on the handle of his sword and got ready to just smash through the barrier. He shook his head and put his hand on his shoulder. He has been very serious, which is not like his usual stupid behavior. No bro, let Samui handle it yo. He said this as he looked at the man in the mask on the other side. The Raikage clenched his teeth in silence but still let go of his sword. Samui was going for the kill by swinging her sword with unmatched force. The best way to avoid getting killed yourself was to put your opponent on the defense. She didn't want to lose to this dumb blonde girl. Before her sword could reach her wrist, Ino kicked it away. Samui went on the defense and started to move away as she was being attacked with both of her blades. Ino didn't slow down at all as she kept slashing with her sword. Samui put her feet down and kicked the blonde away because she thought her time was running out. As she fell backwards, she drove her sword into the ground and made a series of hand gestures. When she pointed, the tips of her fingers lit up with a very bright white light and shot toward the blonde who had just gotten up. Ino quickly jumped away from the white bullets that easily tore through the ground below her. As the blasts kept coming towards her, she had to keep moving. Everyone is getting closer. Ino quickly pulled out an explosive kunai and threw it at the next bullet that was coming at her. Samui stopped for a second, and the smoke made it hard for her to see. Then, when Ino jumped out of the smog cloud, she kept shooting. The real girl kicked Samui into the side of the barrier after she hit the masked girl in the chest with a well-aimed shot. She quickly got to her feet and rushed her again. She was angry that the woman was so flexible that she could move out of the way of each punch she threw. 1 minute. Naruto put out a call. Samui wrinkled her brow and kept going, doing her best to stay out of the blonde's way of attacking. Eventually, they both got their swords back, and they started dancing in a shower of sparks and cuts. Samui was getting beaten up badly as Ino blocked all of her attacks with one blade and gave her small cuts that didn't look like much. Slowly, though, she started to notice that her body wouldn't do what she told it to. She was hitting herself with the hilts of her blades at the same time. Ino cut a deep hole in the back of Samui's calf, which caused her to fall to the ground. She didn't figure out the masked girl's plan until it was too late, and she couldn't move. Bee and the Raikage were shocked as she raised her sword for the final blow. Naruto called out just as he put his hand on the handle of his sword. Time. The blade of Ino stayed right at the woman's neck. Babe, she whimpered like she was begging him to let her kill herself. Samui was left helpless, with tiny cuts and bruises all over her arms and legs that didn't look like much at first but were a lot worse than anyone thought. She couldn't move her fingers at all. With a knife pointed at her neck, she felt like a fool. Now, Ino. Naruto answered in a soft way. You had 2 minutes just like everyone else, he told her, nodding his head in her direction. Ino huffed and flicked the small amounts of blood off her blades. In a flash, she was back on her throne, arms and legs crossed, looking very unhappy about the whole thing. Samui let out a sigh of relief when she saw her son crying for her. Darui and Bee also calmed down when they saw that everything was going to be okay. Hey, you'll send her back, right? She hurt herself. The Raikage said this because he didn't like that she was still down there. Naruto looked at her still body and then began to look at everyone else. Ino could see that he was thinking of something. Something in his mind clicked when he looked over at the Mizukage's party. He looked at the prize, which was his wife. Then he turned around and looked at Samui, who couldn't move. Did you listen? She's in pain. The Raikage spoke up once more. He saw how the man's head moved around and he didn't even look at him. Ino was trying to copy what Naruto did with his head. She asked, "Whatcha thinkin', babe?" Naruto got up and started to walk around behind the prizes. The way his mask was turned never showed where he was looking or what kind of sick thing he was going to do next. "Actually," she said, "I think this is a great chance to make a point." He said this as he walked over to the right side of the platform. He stopped right behind the person who had won the last prize. A woman with short brown hair was hiding on her knees by hunching over. From this far away, Naruto looked at the Mizukage. Partly because he couldn't see it, the man with blue hair didn't try to avoid his gaze. He felt sick to his stomach when he realized that it was their turn. He only had to do what the man said. If he had to kill someone, he would do it right away without any doubt. He had, "Mizukage, your fiancé here, Nizaya Koroyo." He asked the question as a joke since he already knew the answer. The Mizukage did nothing but give him a dangerous look. He asked, "She has never been a shinobi, right?" Again, as expected, he heard nothing back. He cut the rope that was holding her hands together and took the chain off of her neck and said, "Well, she hasn't." He grabbed her arm and pulled her up, ignoring her muffled pleas for her life. "Hey," yelled the cage as he walked up to the side of the barrier. He put his hands on it and leaned forward as if he was trying to get a better look. He yelled in a hurry, "Don't hurt her." Naruto didn't care and took a few steps forward. He ignored him for now and talked to the other people still there, including Gaara. "Now you say that not all of us are monsters, I say. We are." He grabbed her by the throat and held her over the edge of the cliff, much to the horror of the Kiri group and his family. She had her hands around his wrist, and her brown eyes were pleadingly big and staring into his eye holes. "Naruto, wait, no." Minato yelled and held out his hands as if to tell him to calm down. Naruto didn't care about the angry shouts of protest and kept going. Now, the face on his mask was looking at the woman he was holding. He talked to her as if she were there. "When your way of life or even your life is in danger, you will do anything to keep it." He said it was no problem at all to hold the woman up while she kicked. It's just how people are. Even if there is another way, if the action has a positive result right away, we will take it if the other way isn't a sure thing. "Please," the Mizukage yelled as his huge sword hit the barrier. "I'll do whatever you want," he said, looking up to see that Samui was still on the middle platform. "Do you want me to kill her? I'll do it. Please, just..." The Raikage's party gave him a daring look when he said that, but he didn't even bother to look at them. Naruto looked over at the man with blue hair. He just looked at him idly. "Tempting," he said. But no, just like that, he let go of Aya, who fell down. The air was filled with horrified gasps and the Mizukage's own hellish scream. He put chakra into his sword and hit it as hard as he could while making a war cry. Before he hit it again, his attention was drawn to the middle barrier, where Aya had landed in a flash of light. With her eyes almost popping out of her head and her tears coming back full force, she fell and landed on her back. She rolled awkwardly to get to her knees. In another bright flash, a Kane showed up right in front of her. She needs to do it. Naruto was done looking at the scared civilian woman from below. The Raikage and the Mizukage yelled to say that they didn't agree, screaming at the redhead their own words that were full of hate and threats. Naruto walked back to his throne and sat down without any trouble. His eyes went straight across the room to his brother, whose face he couldn't read. "To free you, Aya," he called out while still looking straight into Menma's eyes. "Kill this woman, and you and your group can leave." He said that everyone was shocked. Aya's eyes were on the blade in front of her, and she couldn't stop the tears from coming out of her eyes. "You decide not to kill her, so you and your party stay in the game for the rest of it, and your husband will have to fight for you at some point," he said. The first thing that came to her mind was that she would never do it. She would wait until Chijiro came to save her. But then she thought about how violently the Tsuchikage had died. A different cage killed the man she brought with her. Her eyes went up to the platform where they were. What would happen if the Raikage or the Hokage chose Ao or Haki to fight? They would have no chance if she stayed. She would be choosing for them to die, even though Chijiro might save her or might not. She looked back down at the kunai and then up into the eyes of the woman in front of her who was standing still. Both her heart and her brain were arguing for different options, and both were right. She screamed so loudly that she couldn't figure out what to do. A monstrous thing to do for sure freedom, Naruto just called out. Or a good thing to do for an uncertain chance at life. He asked her in a threatening way, which bent her will even more. The constant yelling of the people around her made her worry even more. Even from a long way away, the look in the woman's eyes was eating her soul. She hadn't said anything. She'd just looked back at her with tears in her eyes. Aya reached out and grabbed the kunai with a very shaky hand. She held it up and looked at the very end of it. Then she turned and looked at the blonde woman. She slowly moved forward on her feet until she was right in front of Samui. She got down on her knees and looked at her, trying to keep herself from giving up. She couldn't avoid it. This person was a total psycho. She knew that as soon as she said no, he would do something worse to them. He talked as if he knew that she would kill this girl in the end. He was trying to prove something to everyone here, and there's no telling what he'd do if she didn't join in and proved him wrong. The Rakage yelled, "Don't do it," and pushed against the glass in anger. He looked at his son, who was watching the whole thing, and said, "Don't you fucking do it. Don't look, son. Look away," he begged. B stood still behind him and watched everything happen. Even though it broke his heart, he stayed calm because he knew that nothing they could do would change the outcome. The Mizuki's shouts told her to do it, of course. He needed her to do it if it was the only way to save her life. He kept looking back at the masked man and cursing him for making his soon-to-be wife do something so big. But he needed her to do it if it was the only way out. "Aya-chan, just do it. Please, just do it. It won't take long." In their different pleas to the woman, they looked at each other a few times, yelled insults and hateful things, and then went right back to yelling threats and encouragements at the weak-minded woman. The people from Konoha tried to calm the two men down before things got out of hand, but their words were always drowned out by the two men's high-pitched screams. Aya looked into the eyes of Samui. Before, she had never killed anyone. Could she do this at all? This woman was being watched by her husband, who told her what would happen if she did it. Her child was also watching. How could she kill herself this way? Before she knew it, all of the sounds around her had faded away, leaving her alone with her thoughts once more. She was looking at the kunai she was holding, hands that were shaking all the time. They just kept going. As she tried to talk to herself and convince herself that this was the right thing to do, tears hit her wrists. Naruto let out a sigh and looked out to sea. From where the beams of light were coming from, he could tell that it was likely a little afternoon. He was getting a headache from the noise of all the voices mixing together. "Aya, you do not have all day. Either you do it or you miss the chance." He said it loudly enough for her to hear over the noise. She shut her eyes tightly and then opened them again to look at the kunai she was holding. She calmed her heart and tried to block out the other people's screams. With a heavy heart and shaking hands, she brought the blade up over her head. This added fuel to the fire and made the screaming around her louder. She drove the kunai down with her eyes closed in an unintentional scream of anger. When the metal hit the woman's skin and bones, she could hear and feel the blood pouring out of her chest. She could no longer take it. She took the blade out and drove it down again and again and again. It was quiet there. The violence of the scene left them speechless. The only sounds left were Aya's grunts of effort and frustration, the squishing of her hands, and the blade going in and out of Samui's bleeding chest, as well as the child's muffled cries as he watched his mother be killed by a woman who had taken care of him while he was a slave. He got down on his knees. There was no way to describe the look on his face. He put his hands in his lap and watched as the woman repeatedly stabbed Samui. The Mizukage was also looking on in silence. He watched as each stab tore his fiance's mind to pieces. She was changed forever. He had never thought he would see something like this in his life. He would never want to see it. His heart was full of sorrow and regret for the man on the other side of the formations. This wasn't fair to them. All of them were hurt by this. He was glad to know that his wife was safe, but what she had to do to get there was horrible. He calmed himself down by telling himself that if his wife had been in the same situation as him, she would have done the same thing. He hoped he knew what that meant. Aya finally stopped stabbing the woman violently, even though the woman was already dead, and she threw the kunai away from her. She knelt down and cried out sorry after sorry for the dead woman in front of her. She couldn't avoid it. It was a must. She kept telling herself this over and over. She threw up what was left in her stomach from the last time she ate while she was bent over. Along with it, tears and pleas for forgiveness poured out. Naruto saw the whole thing happen in front of him. His attention was on how his family looked. Just like everyone else, they couldn't believe what they saw. This just seemed like too big of a surprise. The Kazekage, who had red hair, also watched in shock. None of them could understand what had just happened. "Animal is an insulting word that doesn't fit what we are," he said suddenly to get everyone's attention again. When someone is mean, we all tend to call them an animal. But if you look at it closely, humans are the only animals that can do such horrible things. In other words, he said, looking down at the two women in the barrier. "Aya, you are a person, and you can leave." He said this as he let the barrier go down. The barrier around the Mizukage also fell, letting him and his two chosen helpers out. He didn't waste any time getting down to his fiancée. He hugged her and covered her eyes so she couldn't see the horrible sight of the mutilated blonde in front of them. The smell made him wrinkle his nose, and he looked up at the man in the mask. The anger in his eyes was clear to Naruto. "You can attack me however you want if you want to end up like the Tsuchikage," he said in a scary way. "Your prize has freed herself. Use this chance to leave while you still can." The Mizukage glared at him, and for a second, the others thought he was going to attack him. He picked up his fiancée in a bridal carry while keeping an eye on the man in the mask who was attacking him. "I swear I'll find you if they don't kill you when this is all over." He said it with his eyes filled with pure hate. Even though the threat didn't mean anything, Naruto nodded his head sharply to show that he wasn't scared. After saying his piece, the Mizukage turned to leave, but he stopped when he saw the Raikage looking right back at him. "If it had been your wife, you would have thought she would have done the same." To try to help him understand, he said. The Raikage did nothing but look at him for a moment. He had a disgusted look on his face. "Unfortunately, it wasn't my wife." The threat was clear to the Mizukage, so he nodded his head and started to walk away. He and his men jumped off the cliff before the middle barrier shot back up, leaving only 3 more groups. Samui's body was brought to the ground by a clone, and the area was cleaned up for the next event, which had not yet been decided. Naruto looked at everyone as if he was trying to figure out what to do next. "Let's see," he said quietly, tapping his hands on his armrests as he tried to think of something. "Well, I don't want to fight more than one Biju," he said. He said by making hand gestures. The Kazekage and B appeared on opposite sides of the arena in a flash of light. They were both completely still and didn't want to play any games. When they got into the arena, red chakra started to bubble up around them, which was a literal representation of how angry they were. "Well, Kazekage, for a man who talks about how horrible people are, you know a lot about what it's like to be one of them," he said, looking at him. The Kazekage did not answer his meaningless words. Instead, his gourd began to fall apart, and then it made a sand tail. The sand started to cover most of his body until the top half of it looked like a much smaller shukaku. These shapes stayed the same, except for the red outline of the hachabai that went around his body. His eyes couldn't be seen because of his glasses, and his face didn't seem to say much. But Naruto could tell from what he knew about the guy that he was very angry. Naruto just sat back and squished himself into his seat. He was sure that this was a good match. Oh, and if you haven't already noticed, this seal won't let you fully change, for reasons that are obvious. With a shrug, he said, "This one has no stakes. You two seem so angry that you could tear anything to pieces, so go for it," he said. B ran forward with his arm held out. He didn't need anything else. When the inside of his elbow hit the sand creature's throat, he didn't expect to start sinking in. He turned around, pulled the body part out of the sand, and kicked the man away. The sand broke the Kazekige's blow as he hit the wall of the barrier. He got up and went straight for the Kumo Jinchuriki. When the slippery man threw his arm forward, the sand moved out and just missed him by an inch. Ino yawned on her throne, which caught Naruto's attention. "This is kind of dull, honey," she told the truth. "I'm going to take a nap." Behind his mask, Naruto raised an eyebrow, but he shrugged his shoulders and went back to watching the fight. When B rolled up and stood up, he was holding all of his swords at once, which confused the Kazekage. One was in his mouth, one was in the back of his knee, one was in the crook of his neck, and one was in the space between his thigh and stomach. He didn't think they could be used as such. B jumped so well that he didn't hit the sand strand that shot at him. He threw down 2 of his swords in an attempt to stab the person inside. He couldn't hurt the sand, but if he could get inside and kill the Kazekage, the Shukaku would also die and have to wait somewhere else to come back to life. When he hit the ground, he rolled forward and grabbed the 2 swords he had thrown. He kept going, dodging sand bullet after sand bullet. After rolling under the last one, he tried to push his sword through by going in. As soon as it got close enough, a plate of sand shot up from the ground and stopped it from hitting the main body. He let go of the blade and kicked the handle on his way back. He was standing on a thin strip of sand when he landed. When it moved, he fell backwards. He looked up and saw the wave that was about to hit him. The Kazekage made his hand out of sand and clenched it down, directing the wave of golden stuff to crush the man. Before it hit him, a tentacle came out of nowhere and covered the man's body. He pulled back the sand and saw that B now had 2 very big tentacles sticking out of his back somewhere. This meant that he was also good at making partial changes. He didn't care about what she said and sent out more waves of sand to try to completely cover him. B used his tentacles to move the tendrils out of the way and then ran forward with the sword still on his body. After making a path to the center, he threw one of his blades at his head. Before it could get close again, a flat piece of sand rose up. He was trying to figure out how to get around that armor. He used ninjutsu that was based on the earth because he could control sand. If he attacked him with lightning, he might be able to weaken him a bit. He rushed forward, charging his 5 remaining blades with lightning chakra, and started attacking the main creature directly, letting the tentacles protect him from the sand. He turned and cut at the beast from every possible angle, but nothing was getting through. He lost his way and fell into a sinking pool of sand that started to swallow him up. He tried to climb up by sticking his tentacles to anything that would pull him up, but the sand made it so nothing would stick. Darui was horrified as he watched and thought that even B might not be able to handle this. He was worried when he saw him sink into the strange sinkhole. B was strong, but just a few hours before, he had seen this same man crush a man who had rock armor to protect him. He felt better when he saw that the sand was getting much more like mud than it had been. Two of B's tentacles came out of the muddy sink full of sand, stuck to the wall, and pulled him out of the mud. He stayed high off the ground, and his tentacles stuck to the barrier's hard surface. He had the idea while he was up there. It seemed clear that water was the problem, which was good because there was an easy way to fix it. He made hand gestures, puffed up his chest, and shot water bullet after water bullet at the sand creature. When the Kazekage saw how dangerous it was, he used the sand he made from the ground to block the water while he made more. He knew that the man's plan was to soak all of his sand and leave him defenseless, but that was fine with him. He stopped each water bullet to protect the sand armor around his body that was part of the Shukaku. B kept making more and more of them, and each one got bigger as she put more and more chakra into it. He had to keep moving around the top of the barrier to avoid getting hit by the counterattacks that were coming his way. He didn't know any water techniques that would work over a large area, so for now, these water bullets would have to do. The Hachibai was explaining that the story was about how weak the Shukaku's containers were when they were in this state. So that must be his most important point. Hit and counter hit went on for a few minutes until B saw that the cage could only use mud, which was too slow and weak to be effective. He then swung forward and landed near the mud-covered creature with his swords drawn once more. The mud was trying to hold him down by wrapping around his ankles, but he was just walking right through it. It was the same as walking in regular mud. The Kazekage played the part well, swiping at him as he tried to get away. He really did look like he was helpless, but when B finally started running, his calm look came back. B went around him until he was behind him, then he went for the weak spot. He went in for the attack, but just as he drove his sword forward, a tendril of chakra shot up and caught his wrists, lifting him off the ground. B tried to pull it away with his tentacles, but he couldn't. As soon as he did, two thinner strands of sand shot through the mud and cut it off. He brought out another one, but the same thing happened to it. Darui's eyes got wide, and he didn't even know how that could happen. All it was sand. He yelled, B, when he saw how helpless he looked. B was also not sure what to do. This sand was just cutting off his arms. That couldn't happen unless it was some sort of jutsu or when the thin tendrils that were cutting the tentacles rose in front of his face. His eyes got bigger. There was a flash of light on the tips before they went straight through his head and chest. The blades of his discarded swords stuck out of the back of his head and chest. The swords he carelessly let fall into the sand when this little battle started. The Rakage yelled, no, as he hit the barrier with his sword. No, no, no. He has seen someone die twice today. He was sure that B, of all people, couldn't lose. He looked at the man in the mask who started to clap when the battle was over. You cretin, I'll fucking kill you. He yelled and hit the barrier with his blade over and over again. He had no idea that his son was watching him go crazy. Naruto didn't pay attention to the usually calm Kage's calls for his head. Slowly, he clapped for the Kazekage, who had let the mud fall off his body as he looked at the Kumo ninja who had fallen in front of him. In an instant, he was back where he was, looking at the ground. Again, a clone hit the place where the last battle took place and then went down into the ground. Naruto looked over at his fellow redhead, who was standing still and not saying a word. Well, Kazekage, I have to say that was a very impressive show. He said this as he looked at what he had won. You're a very strong person, like the well-known Killer Bee. He said this while giving a nod to the Rakage, who was still swearing at him. I'm trying to figure out what to do with you because you've done each of my jobs with such grace. I'm not sure if that's enough of a good reason to let you go yet. He said this to deny that he had ever let the Mizukage leave without doing anything. Have I treated you unfairly? The Kazekage looked at him with pure hate in his eyes. At this moment, he didn't like anything about him. Even though he didn't like him much before, he was sure he was going to kill him now. I have a reason for it. He said it while sitting. No one has yet figured out the real reason I'm doing this. He said it as he stood up. I mean, it's not like none of you have ever been here before. Now you know what it's like to see it happen in real time. He said, going back and forth. Who among you has left? He asked, looking around as if he didn't know. Everyone looked at both Iwa and Kiri's empty pillars. Ah, yes. Iwa, a country built on the pride of its ancestors. It makes you sick to see such a country running around, doesn't it? They're gone because they wouldn't let it go. They were always on the edge of getting even. In this experiment, they let all of their anger out on Suna. Had she forgiven the Keisuke for doing what he did because he had to, she would have gone back to her spot to fight another day and probably gotten an opponent she could beat in the time allotted, but her desire for vengeance was too strong for her to handle. She killed to get back at them. Minato was finally starting to get it. He said that he chose these things at random, but they weren't. It was a cycle of one thing leading to another. You might be wondering why I let Kiri leave without even letting her step into the arena, right? He asked, but no one answered. Well, it's not hard. Kiri is known for making mistakes that hurt itself, and that's what they did in this case. The cage of Kiri wasn't the one who spoke for them. No, Kiri's cage are known to let people down, so I went to the people instead. I wouldn't give up the chance to be free because she was afraid that her cage would fail. The Raikage gave him a look that meant death. He gave them permission to kill his wife as an experiment, as she refused to kill the girl. May her soul rest in peace, he said as he looked at the Raikage, which made him angry. They might have lived longer if they had done that. He said this with a head shake. This made no sense to anyone. Minato spoke up for all of the people. You let them go, right? He asked, afraid that he had something else in store for them. Naruto calmed his mind. No, I did, he said, nodding his head. But I don't think the Raikage will just let that slide, he said as he looked at him. You're damn right, he spewed. I'll come after you as soon as I'm done with them. He said this with a look of death in his eyes. He seemed totally crazy. Behind his mask, Naruto smiled. Oh, no doubt. I think Suna comes next. He said this while nodding at the Keisuke, who didn't care about the threat. Even though he didn't say it, the Raikage agreed. Keisuke, what about you? Iwa is still on your list, right? When he looked at him, he asked. He finally lifted his head. He had a dead look in his eyes that said a lot about who he was. Iwa will fall. Kuma will fall just as Konoha. You don't deserve to be alive, he said in a scary way. Menma was surprised and looked over at him. Keisuke-san, he said to try to talk him out of it. He still didn't like the fact that Naruto came from Konoha. Naruto is no longer a shinobi of Konoha. I don't care. You'll fall too. He spoke in a low voice, and his eyes showed no sign of a joke. Suna, Naruto said, drawing everyone's attention again. The country that fought its way out of the shame of the sand dunes to make its mark on the world, they get hit the most. But they keep going and fight. Kumo is the country that has a strong belief in power and rule, but is also strong in its ability to take care of itself. And then there's Konoha. Both the Keisuke and the Raikage kept a suspicious eye on them. What was the reason they hadn't been touched yet, if there was one? Oh, right, the country everyone loves to hate. You sit on your throne without getting hurt, and watch as everyone else falls apart. A false god is one that he said. Stay put. Minato said this to try to protect them. We are safe only because you didn't pick any of us, he said, pointing out what was already clear. No, of course not. There was no reason to. He talked as if he had just told them something very important. You guys make the most enemies without any help at all. What gives? He asked in a way that made it sound like he meant it. He nodded and said, your power. Minato and Menma looked at each other like they didn't understand. Now, he told them things that they already knew. We already knew this. We know that the more powerful you are, the bigger the target on your back. He said it as if he knew what crazy idea Naruto was going to come up with next. Well, that's not it at all. He said that it was shocking. In fact, it's the opposite. I should have said that your power is fake, he said with a nod. You think the people in your village make it the strongest because they are in it. With people like Kakashi of the Sharingan, the Red Death, the Uchiha clan as a whole, the Hyuga, the Yellow Flash, and so on. You've become proud now that you're at the top. Now you walk around and show off your skills like they're some kind of badge of honor, he said in disgust. Are you saying we are weak? Menma asked, not understanding a word he was saying. On the other hand, Naruto said, now they're really lost. He would say the opposite of everything they said. Who was it? You're strong. But as a whole, your village is very weak with the people you have. There is no doubt a power struggle going on that you don't even know about, Naruto said. Now he was talking like he knew something they didn't. Naruto asked Menma, how well do you know your people? He was really lost now. He yelled, what the hell are you talking about? Your people, Menma, he said, slowing down his speech in a mocking way. How well do you know them? Minato took the initiative and placed his hand on Menma's shoulder. We know them well, Naruto. Far better than you do, he said in a brief moment of arrogance. Naruto chuckled beneath his mask. I would argue that case too, Sam, he said with a grin. In fact, I'd venture into saying that you are completely unaware of what goes on within the shadows of that great tree of yours. You live in ignorance of a village that does not follow you, contrary to what you may believe. Friendship is a fickle thing, and let's just say I learned that the hard way. What are you trying to say? Menma asked, not liking what he was implying even though he didn't actually understand it. It sounded like he was saying they had traitors in the village, which he wouldn't stand to hear. Naruto just shrugged and walked towards the Raikage's prize slot. Well, if you don't get it, that's fine. You will eventually, he said cryptically. Get the fuck away from him, the Raikage yelled, seeing Naruto standing behind his son. That was all he had now, and he'd be damned if he lost him too. Naruto stared him in the eyes and went through hand signs. In a flash of light, the carrier holding the Kage's nephew appeared in the center arena. The barrier fell as did the Kage's. You've done well, Gaara. You are free to go. I believe you get the point. Gaara said nothing. He grabbed his nephew and left. Once he was gone, the barrier arose once again. Going through hand signs, the Raikage appeared within it. As do you, Raikage, he said, breaking the collar from the boy's neck. In a flash of light, the boy was in the barrier, stumbling from the disorientation. The Raikage caught him before he fell. He hugged him to his chest and glared up at Naruto. The barrier fell again. The look he was giving him was enough to know that there would be hell to pay if he didn't die here. He turned to leave and stared up at Minato and Naruto. Another monster from Konoha. He shook his head and walked off, letting his statement hang in the air. When he left, Naruto chuckled. Wow, is that what Konoha is known for? Huh, he said as if everything were just normal. Minato stepped up to address him. What now? He asked, looking around at all the empty slots. What do we have to do to get her back? Naruto looked down at the sleeping child in the carrier. He shrugged his shoulders and sent her down to the arena in a flash. The barrier around them fell as well. Nothing. Congratulations for effortlessly surviving, he said. They all jumped down and Kushina picked up Sumair. Naruto and Ino sat on their thrones lazily staring at the group. Well, Naruto was staring at them. Ino was still asleep. Menma and Minato stepped forward, staring off against the two of them, their intentions clear. We're not letting you two go, Menma said seriously. You didn't expect us to just leave, did you? Naruto leaned his head on his hand. Of course not, Ataudo. That'd be too easy, he said in a condescending tone. Menma grit his teeth. Before he did anything, his mother stepped forward with the baby in her arms. Naruto, are you not done? She asked him incredulously. Everyone's gone. We're not going to kill you, she said. Naruto chuckled and looked past her. TCH, speak for yourself, he said, eyeing his father. Isn't that right too, Sam? Kushina spun around, seeing he had already pulled his kunai. Minato, why? Kushina, take Sumair and Kakashi home, he said with a serious tone. His distraught expression telling her all she need to know. She slowly shook her head, knowing what he was saying. No, she said lowly. No, you can't do this. You're not gonna kill him. Minato, he's our son, she yelled. What if he kills you? Then I'll probably deserve it. Kushina, it's like you said. This is our fault. He looked up to Naruto, trying to convince himself as well. And we have to fix it. Kushina looked down to Sumair while he spoke. She did say that. Those were words from her own mouth, so what's changed now? Nothing did. She was right then, just as Minato is right now. She shut her eyes and kissed Sumair's forehead. She handed her to Kakashi. Then, I'm staying, she said, turning around and looking up at the two as well. Minato was about to dispute it, but she beat him to the punch. We have to fix it, she said, giving him a look that told him she wasn't leaving. Minato sighed and nodded to her. Ino yawned as her eyes fluttered open. Ugh, she said, looking around. Wow, everyone's already gone, she said, smiling over at Naruto. We finally gonna fight the family? She asked, as if this were a story told to her before. Naruto smirked and nodded. Yeah, it seems like it, he said, standing to his feet with her following his lead. Let's give him hell doll face. Naruto and Ino walked to the edge of the cliff and waited for his family to realize what had to be done. Naruto looked on as Kakashi picked up Sumair. The man with silver hair gave him one more look. Naruto, I'm sorry we let you fall as far as you have. In a way, we're all to blame. He said it in a way that showed how sorry he was. I wish things had turned out differently. After he said what he wanted to say, he started to hobble toward the edge. Naruto stood there and watched him go for a while. And so do I, Kakashi, he said. The Jonin with silver hair stopped moving for a moment. He didn't turn around, but he stopped to listen to what was being said. In his mind, those words came from Naruto when he was younger. Before this one, he chose to remember him this way, not with that look of trouble on his face. He left them to fight their fateful battle with a heavy heart, knowing there was only one way out. Now that he was gone, Minato looked up at Naruto. Neither of them moved. They just stood still and looked at each other. Naruto, he made a hollow sound. No matter what you've done in the past or what you've done now, I've always been proud of the wonderful shinobi you've become. He said that he wanted to get that off his chest while he could. Everyone, including him, knew that either they or their opponent would die at the end of this battle. There wouldn't be any kindness here. The next person to talk was Menma. He also had something to say. I don't know what it will mean to you, but when we were younger, I did everything I did just for you. I wanted to start training so early because of this. I just wanted to see how you were doing. Seems like I never did. He said this with a hollow laugh and a swallow to get the lump out of his throat. Kushina didn't have much to say either, but she did say something. She took a deep breath and tried not to cry in front of them. I have no idea why you did this. I have no idea what it means to you, but the dams were starting to let in water. She was lucky that a crack of thunder seemed to start the rain, which started coming down very quickly. This is the life you chose, and no matter what, in any situation. With a sad laugh, she said, you found someone who cares about you, someone who opens up the world to you. I'm really glad for you. She was honest in what she said. Naruto still had not said anything. He was just looking at them and following whoever was talking with his eyes. After everyone had said what they wanted to say, he looked out to sea and watched the water swirling violently below. I thought it fit the situation like a poem. Watch me sleep, and when I wake up, smile. Remember what I said before you put me down again. We'll always be the same as we have always been. We will always be whole, no matter how broken we are. I'll say it again to make sure you understand. We always will. His speech ended there, and he took a deep breath. He turned toward the group and got himself back on his feet. I understand how hard this can be when family goes up against family. This is a scene I've seen a lot. The three of them looked confused at what he said. He gave a shoulder shrug. It was in a book, in fact, a lot of books. It seems like family members kill each other all the time. After all, these kinds of stories are the most interesting. As he talked, he took off his jacket to get ready for the fight that was coming. Maybe it's part of humanity's sick plan for us to have crazy thoughts about killing our own family. He took his sword and strap out of its case and put it around his body. Since it's so common, you'd have to think something like that, right? When everyone saw him getting ready, they did the same, letting the thunder and rain add to Naruto's words as he spoke. Once upon a time, there was a set way to write a good book. I think Jiraiya was the last person to try something like that. He said this as he pulled out his sword and swung it around in the air to check its balance. No one will ever write as well as that old pervert did. He said it with a laugh while bouncing on the balls of his feet. Even though he was horribly perverted, he knew how to write when he wasn't writing about smut and porn. Now that I think about it, Tsunade also wrote a book. There are a lot of good writers from Konoha. He said it with his head shaking. Anyways, and going off the subject, he said that he was done. Don't waste such a nice day. Everyone stopped moving in any way. They didn't move an inch as they looked at each other. Most of the other sounds were drowned out by the rain and the waves. Minato and Menma had different ways of holding their three-pronged kunai. The only sword Naruto had was held in the same way. Both of Ino's swords were held backwards, and Kushina used hers like a real swordswoman. The non-stop rain between them showed that neither of them had anything bad in mind. As soon as the next bolt of lightning hit, the battle began. Menma threw his kunai forward and ran to it, but the red-haired man who was following him kicked him back right away. Minato moved quickly to Menma and grabbed his hand on the way. At the same time, he kicked at Naruto, but the kick went right past him. Before Naruto could cut him in half, his mother came running in and blocked the blade. Naruto landed in the arena after getting back on his feet. Before Kushina could get to him, she was drop-kicked and sent flying over the side of the building. Ino dove off right after her. Naruto watched as the kunai coming toward him grew in number until they were all around him. To his surprise, Menma and Minato both started flashing toward the kunai, making a bright yellow light show as they flew to each one. To even the odds, Naruto started flashing to all of them as fast as they were, his red mixing with their bright yellow. When he ran into Menma, he dodged his strike to the throat and thrust his sword forward. Just before it hit Menma, he took off. Naruto also disappeared in a flash, and his sword stood up next to a tag. Naruto jumped to avoid getting hit in the thigh by his father as he flashed to another scene. He flashed to another one and jumped back to avoid a slash to his throat. On his way back, Menma flashed behind him, and when he heard a painful yelp, he knew his plan had worked. As Naruto jumped away from the two, the flashes stopped. When Minato turned around, he saw that Menma had a sword stuck in his calf. Naruto put it on its side because, knowing how carelessly Menma jumps, he knew Menma would go straight to the tag without thinking. Menma took it out and gave it a nod to his father, who did the same. Minato used his Rasengan to move quickly to a kunai near the redhead. Naruto was ready for it, so he jumped up to avoid the blast. As he did this, Menma came at him with one of his own. He felt his father grab his ankle, holding him still and putting a tag on him. Naruto awkwardly turned his body and grabbed Minato's arm. He used his fallen body to get away from his brother's attack, then kicked Minato in the chest to send him flying. Menma got up after his missed attack and ran back into the fight. He picked up the black sword that had been left behind and threw it as hard as he could. Kushina flipped back along the water, putting her feet on the side of the jagged rock formation behind her and flipping up that as well. The knife that was thrown at her went through her side. Ino ran up and pulled the blade out of the stone. She kept attacking the woman with red hair as she ran away. Kushina was very good with a sword. She defended herself from every attack the blonde girl tried to make, even when she tried to hit her pressure points. She stabbed into the rock under her feet and slashed upward, pulling a piece of rock with her. The rock shot toward the blonde because of gravity, and she had to cut through it to stay on the side of the rocks. As soon as she did, Kushina fell toward her with both feet spread. Ino didn't have time to move out of the way, so she took the drop kick into the air, which sent her flying into the water. She put her sword into a rock and got back on her feet. Kushina had done the same thing, and when Ino ran forward, she ran forward, too. Ino stuck one of the swords sideways into the rock and kept going. He seemed to want to fight the woman with just one blade. For a second, the two blades touched. Then, Kushina used her own weight against her and pushed her back. Ino quickly regained control and rushed toward the woman with red hair, slashing at her with all her strength. As they went up higher and higher, Kushina had to defend herself again. When Kushina finally had some space, she cut her chakra and dove toward the surprised blonde. She ducked out of the way of her strike and tackled her. The two of them stumbled along the edge of the rocks until Ino came back to herself. She grabbed Kushina's ankles, spun around quickly, and threw her into the water, then fell right behind her. On the way, she pulled the sword out of the wall where she had stuck it and threw it down after her. When Kushina turned around and hit the water, she saw that both the sword and the blonde were coming toward her. Quickly, a chain shot out of her back and hit the sword, knocking it off course. It went straight for Ino, who had no protection, but she punched the side of the rock formation and threw herself further out into the sea. She landed on the rough water and waited for the woman with red hair to come back to the surface. When she saw a flash of gold below her, her eyes lit up. She jumped to avoid the chain that was almost going to stab her, and she had to keep jumping to avoid the others that followed. She finally found the source when she saw her surface and stand up out of the water. She took a deep breath and cut the chakra from her feet. Then, using her knowledge of water jutsu, she moved around the strong currents that were trying to flank her. While she was down there, she had to avoid the same chains that had been after her before. She thought she would have a better chance on top, so she came back up, shot through the air, and jumped away from the hits. She started going around the rock formations in a circle, hoping to confuse the redhead or at least test her to see how far these chains could go. She went in and out of the rock formations that had just been made the day before. Kushina knew about her plan, but she still went along with it. She lost her concentration when a loud boom came from the top of the arena column. Then there was a rumbling sound, and then something flew from the side of the pillar and split the top in half. Whatever it was, it went out with a smoke trail. Menma was the one who fell into the water when it finally broke through. Before checking on Menma, she looked back to see if the blonde girl was still trying to get away from her chains. She saw him struggle to get back to the surface, but he looked fine. "To Sam," he yelled as he looked up to the top of the formation. Kushina followed his eyes and saw Naruto coming at the man who was stumbling with a sword. She had to think fast, so she yelled hard and tightened her chains enough to break the rock formations at their base, which brought the rest of it down with it. Naruto was thrown off balance by the sudden earthquake. He looked out toward the sea and jumped away as the building began to tilt. When he landed on the very rough water, he steadied himself and looked back at the three people who had gotten back together. On the other side of them was Ino, who was standing on the flattened piece that was still above water. The three people they were fighting turned to each other and seemed to talk for a short time before nodding to each other. Menma and Kushina turned and ran toward Ino. It was clear they wanted to kill her quickly so they could all attack him at once. He thought it was a good idea. He looked at his father, who started to walk toward him. It's sad when a father faces his son in battle, especially if both of them are close to dying. He said it loudly enough for Minato to hear him over the sound of the rain and the crashing waves. Minato shrugged his shoulders and tried to catch his breath. He started running toward the redhead at a slow trot and then sped up until he was sprinting. Ino moved out of the way of the blonde cage's attack and stood in front of Kushina's attack. She kicked her in the knee, knocking her down. Then she rolled out of the way of Menma's step, which broke the rock under her. She stood up and ran at him, picking up the sword she had dropped and slashing at him with it. He had to move out of the way because he had no kunai left to protect himself. Menma got his chance when Ino almost slipped on the wet rock. He gave her a punch in the stomach, which made her bend over and drop her sword again. As he did this, his mother flew over his head and hit her in the back of the head with an axe. When Ino's mask fell to the ground, it broke in two. She rolled out of Kushina's way to avoid the final blow. Menma kicked her in the chest when she stood up, sending her back out toward the water. She got herself back on her feet and made a series of hand signs. As if it weren't raining, a ball of fire shot toward the two of them. It hit the place where they had been standing. Now they were going in different directions, and she knew that if she had even a small chance of staying alive, she had to get back to Naruto. Just as they tried a high-low attack, she dove into the water and ran away, with Kushina's chain following her. She jumped from right to left as she came out of the water to avoid the chains that were trying to pull her back. Naruto wasn't much farther away. They worked better together, so they had a chance if she made it. She was surprised when Menma walked up to her and kneed her in the face, which was no longer covered. Almost right away, she felt blood rush into her head. With no time to recover, Menma delivered a roundhouse kick that sent her skipping across the water. He went over because he didn't want her to get up. When he thought she was about to, he went for a kick that would have hit if she had kept moving the same way. But she cut her chakra and fell into the water instead. When she got back up with a kunai in her hand, Menma jumped away to avoid her. So he could take up a little less space, he had her tagged. After taking a deep breath, he ran back to her and tried to hit her in the face. Ino's reflexes were just too fast, so she dodged him and kicked him where he was weakest. Menma hunched over and held his baby maker until someone kicked him in the nose to get back at him. He fell back, and Ino was already coming at him with the kunai until Kushina's chain caught her leg. She yelled, "Arg!" in pain. Menma got up quickly and went to hit her in the face. Again, Ino cut the chakra to her feet and went under the water. Kushina pulled her back out, which gave Menma a chance to hit her in the stomach. Before he could hit her again, there was a flash of red. Then she kicked him in the chest and he fell down. Naruto took the chain off of Ino's leg and ran away. When he landed, he started taking care of the wound right away while keeping an eye on the others. That will make it hurt less. He said that she had to stand back up by force. You gotta keep fighting, Ino. He said it without much thought as he put his hand over the Hurricane seal they had put on her. She gave them a nod and looked at the three people who had joined them. She and Naruto stood next to each other and looked them in the eyes. Again, a quick flash of lightning marked the start of the battle. Menma and Minato ran forward, but Kushina stayed behind and used her chains to try to catch them. Before he hit Naruto in the side, Ino rolled over Naruto's back and kicked Menma's leg away. She poked him in the throat as he stumbled forward. She kicked him in the chest and then rolled into him to avoid the chain that had separated her and Naruto. As the chain shot toward her, she turned around. Naruto reached out and grabbed Ino's hand. Yanking down, Ino kicked out, stopping Minato's run and kicking up the water, hiding his view momentarily. Naruto's foot flew through it before it even fell, hitting him on the chin and sending him flying back. Naruto jumped back and pulled Ino back with him to avoid the chains that were about to stab them. They landed a ways back and he began going through hand signs. Some kind of oil came out of Ino and stuck to the water. Naruto set it on fire with a stream of flames. Menma jumped to the side and slashed at the two, ignoring the technique. He leapt over the kunai that Ino threw at him and kicked her back. When he got to Naruto, he challenged him to a taijutsu fight. Somehow, he beat the redhead and kicked him back. Naruto got to his feet and rushed forward with Ino following close behind him. They both jumped, avoiding the chain from below. Menma used hand signals to chase after Naruto. In a poof of smoke, two more of him appeared next to him. The three rushed forward and tried to hit each other with punch after punch, but none of them hit. Naruto was able to get rid of the two clones with his much better taijutsu skills. Naruto was so involved in the fight that a chain caught his foot and pulled him forward. Menma quickly put together a Rasengan and hit him in the chest with it. It easily cut through skin and bone, sending Naruto backwards into the water. Menma watched as a rock he hadn't seen stopped him from falling. Ino ran to him and screamed his name. He did it. They did it. Ino dropped to her knees and cradled Naruto's bloodied face in her hands. Hey, you're good to go, she called out in a hurry. Naruto, hey. Desperation and sorrow were clear on her visage. Naruto, please no, don't treat me like this. God damn it, she yelled and hit him in the chest. Minato came up next to him and placed his hand on his shoulder. Menma, get it done, he said, handing him a kunai. Menma looked at it for a few seconds in a sad way before taking a step forward. Ino didn't even turn around to look at him. His chest was hurting. In fact, so was his thigh, and his arm, and his head. When he turned around, he heard his mother call his name at least. That's what he thought. She was shouting something back there in the distance. He couldn't make out what it was, but it was something. Yeah, it was definitely his name. What did she want when things were so bad? He was about to end everything. He was almost done with everything. All he had to do was wake up. his mother's voice finally said. His eyes opened up and half his body was submerged in the water below. He blinked a few times, trying to figure out what was going on. He looked up to see his father fending off against the both of them. But he already killed Naruto. Come on Menma, Kushina said. They used some kind of poison to get you. You're lucky to have the Kyuubi, she said. You would have probably been out for days. Menma blinked a few more times before shaking his head and standing back up. Damn, they got him. Come on Kasen, he said as he ran back inside. Kushina went after him and joined the fight again. As Ino swiped at his chest, Minato jumped away from her. Menma came soaring in, kicking her away and quickly blocked Naruto's strike. When Kushina's chain flew out of the water, Naruto dodged his attack and put him in a choke hold. Then, he gently pushed him forward. Just as the punch was about to hit Menma in the chest, Kushina stopped it. They were both relieved until Naruto fell back down and kicked Menma back to her. When Minato came running at him, he had to jump back right away. He jumped away, and by the time he realized that Minato was trying to lead him away, it was too late, leaving Ino alone with those two again. Clever, when they looked back at him, they rushed forward. Minato had one last tri-pronged kunai. He slashed at Naruto, who leaned out of the way of it. He fought back by giving Minato a quick punch to the chin. Minato blinked it off and slashed again, receiving 2 more jabs before he even brought his arm back. Naruto stuck his arm up and pushed his forearm against Minato's wrist as he tried to cut him from above. With his body exposed, Naruto kneed him in the gut. Minato sputtered and dropped the kunai, letting it fall behind the redhead. As soon as he let go of it, he appeared behind him and flashed to it. Naruto expected it and turned to catch Minato's wrist. When he did, he spun the other way and kicked the man in the chest. Minato was sent skipping across the water like a rock. Naruto flashed to the kunai in Minato's hand and appeared behind him. He stuck his knee out, causing Minato to hit his back incredibly hard. Minato's face contorted in a grimace, and just before he sunk down into the water, Naruto grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and tossed him again. He was sent skidding in the direction of the other 3 who were still hard at the battle. Naruto looked over and saw that Ino was losing, even though she wasn't giving up. Figuring his father had enough, he began walking that way. When he took his first step, someone kicked him in the face. When his back hit the water, he quickly turned around and saw that his father was still standing. He looked like he was on his last legs and didn't have much left in him. Minato wobbled back and forth on his feet, but the fire in his eyes remained. He took a deep breath and then ran again. Naruto's strikes were sloppy, but he was able to dodge and weave them with ease. At this point, it felt like I was fighting a drunk person. He grabbed his fist and used the bottom of his palm to push his nose back into his head painfully. Minato stumbled back disoriented by the strike. Before he could right himself, Naruto kicked him in the stomach, sending him to his knees. You have more fight than I thought you would too, San, Naruto said, looking down at him. I didn't think the yellow flash would do anything less. As he started to move around him, he said. Minato reached out and took a painful hold of Naruto's ankle. He wasn't ready to let him go. Naruto could have just lifted his leg and kept going, but something about lifting his leg stopped him. He looked down and noticed how he was slowly sinking into the water. He turned his head to the side and wondered what kept him going. He grabbed Minato's wrist and pulled his body from the rippling water. He couldn't believe how sad his face looked. There was nothing left in him. He wasn't dead yet or anywhere close to it, but he was too tired to continue fighting. He didn't have the reserves for this waterfront battle. Naruto, yelled Ino from the distance. Naruto turned around and saw that they had finally gotten her under control. Kushina's chakra chains were stuck through her wrists, leaving her to hang by her arms. With Menma now holding the sword, Naruto stared at them for a few seconds before dropping Minato back into the water. He had to fight just to keep his head above water. Menma made a quick choice when he saw him coming and stabbed her in the heart. Her eyes shot open wide and she gasped at the sharp pain. Naruto kicked Menma away and grabbed Ino in a flash of red. The chakra chains dispersed as Kushina ran for the drowning Minato. There was a piece of land shallow enough for him to stand in, so Kushina and Boruto carried him there, not too far from where Ino and Naruto were. Naruto said nothing to her to make her feel better. She was now choking on her own blood and he just watched her pleading eyes. He was holding her body above water though. Slowly, Ino's breathing slowed down a little, and she started to cry. SHH. Naruto spoke to her in a low voice. You were always but an empty doll. You served your purpose. He said it without feeling and shut her eyes for her. The others heard his parting words and were absolutely appalled. How cruel could he be? When the life finally left Ino's eyes, Naruto gently pushed her body down. As more water went in, she started to sink to the bottom. No parting words said, and no cries of sympathy from the man she claimed to love with all of her heart. Naruto used the water to wash the blood from his hands as he stood up. He began walking over to them ever so slowly. When he finally came within range, he stared across the way at his exhausted-looking father and his angry brother. Now, a true family death match. He said it in a way that didn't sound like he cared at all that his friend had just died. No more distractions, he said. What the hell is wrong with you? Menma asked him with clear anger bubbling in his tone. Naruto gave a shrug. Too many things, Otato. Too many things, he said slowly. Well, while we're waiting for Tusan to regain some energy, how about a little insight? He asked, dropping down so that he was just standing in the water and not wasting energy. Insight into what? Menma asked. What could you want more of? He was mentally exhausted from listening to Naruto's ramblings all day. What else could he talk about at this point? After the attack on the leaf, I went to visit an old friend, if you will. He's not much of a friend, but he said this while shaking his head. He is a man who sought more than what everyone believed he did, including myself. For so long, I thought he was a selfish person who only cared about himself. It turns out that you don't really know who a man is until he's dying. I've known this all too well. What the hell are you going on about now? Menma asked, clearly getting frustrated by his cryptic speech pattern. Naruto made a smirking face and waved his hands over the water. The people we face in our lives never truly show who they are until they are forced to do so. Could I tell you a little story while we wait? He asked, but no one replied. He shrugged and continued on. A panther and a tiger, two unlikely companions, found a friendship rooted deep within the confines of secrecy. The tiger was a little unpredictable. Having been scorned by the world too many times to bear, the striped beast grew spiteful in his thinking. Everything he saw or felt was looked at in the worst possible way. He plotted revenge against those that harmed him in the past. Even though he was just a cub, he wanted it so much. He knew all too well how to hate. Then one day, he met a panther cub. Even though they were both young, the panther walked with such grace and joy that it made the tiger wish he could live that way. For, in the world, the tiger was all alone. The panther was the only one who could take care of his whole family. The tiger had no purpose, while the panther had the most. When they first spoke, the tiger was hell-bent on convincing the panther that he should not be as happy as he was. He had a family and a lot of friends, but what would he do when they all died? Or when he ran out of time? The panther just smiled and told the poor, confused little tiger that sometimes the world isn't fair. So, you have to focus on what it does give you, rather than concentrating on what it doesn't do. From that day forth, the tiger changed his ways. Inspired by the sweet tongue of the panther, he vowed to be more like him, even when his surroundings didn't permit it. The tiger cub lived his life by what he said, believing what he said. He believed it wholeheartedly, and had anyone tried to tell him different, he'd ignore it. The panther and the tiger cubs couldn't live without each other. Slowly, the tiger became part of the dark-furred cat's family, and he was treated with the same respect as the panther cub. He got a friend and a family just by ignoring the bad things and focusing on the good things. He loved every second of being with them, but something about them always felt off. It was just a foreign feeling that he held dormant within his soul for many years. As they grew, the cubs became beasts and started to defend their section of the jungle they called their home, and every creature within it. It had been a long time since the tiger felt like he had any purpose, so when he did, he was very thankful. Together, they got stronger, with each person adding fuel to the fire of the other. That's how they got bigger. When the panther fell in love, their lives slowly began to change in different ways. It was an expected thing, of course, but the panther he fell in love with was a somewhat weaker fighter. She could not properly defend herself, and as inevitable as it was in the world they lived in, she was captured by a lion. A lion that everyone hated, for he was the most selfish predator within the jungle. The panther and the tiger went after her, and when they finally caught them, the lion gave the panther an ultimatum. He claimed he wanted to be entertained, so he demanded they fight to the death. During their fight to end it all, the lion talked about a terrible betrayal that the tiger didn't understand. He was babbling on about the darkness of the jungle and how deceitful some of the creatures could be. The stakes went up when the tiger had to fight back for I don't know what reason. As they repeatedly clashed, both going for the kill, the lion finally explained himself. In a way, he told the tiger something that made him realize what it was he was trying to say. He told him, as a child, making a friend is easy, which is why the tactic is so clever. The tiger ended up killing the panther that day, unaware that by doing so, he unintentionally saved a jungle he no longer cared for. When he told everyone what had happened, everyone turned their backs on him. Even though he heard the story and knew he had no choice, he became a person who everyone hated until he was nothing. A prisoner in his own mind, stuck by himself. He stayed the same for years, a lone beast who hated the world and thought of ways to change it. But all those years, he never forgot what that lion said. I'm not sure what they might have meant. He had a feeling, but he didn't know why. When he was no longer alone, he went through the jungle to find what he needed to throw a stone into the pond. When he retrieved these things, he began his deeds, doing things he would have never thought he'd do. Once again, his name was known in hatred, and he was ostracized by many. He eventually found his way back to his section of the jungle with the band of misfits he acquired and attack his own people. Then he went to see an old friend. Well, he wasn't really a friend anymore, but he went back to the lion to ask him that one question. After all these years, the lion remained alive. As it tore him apart, the tiger demanded the answer to the question that had been on his mind for so many years. The lion said he had no issue divulging that information if the tiger was able to defeat him in a fight to the death. After a hard-fought battle of two hated individuals, the lion finally divulged the information. The panther's innocence was a fraud. He had only chosen the tiger as a friend for the sake of drawing him in. The family of the tiger had a plan. They had been quietly getting other families to join them in a sort of takeover. You see, they felt that the jungle was not being ruled the right way. The tiger's actual family had been the ones to lead the jungle for the past few years, and their leadership was lax, for they spent too much time on trivial matters rather than taking an actual interest in the needs of the jungle. Unintentionally on the tiger's part, he and the lion prevented a war all those years ago. The lion stole the panther's heart because he knew that he would come after her. He was the strongest member of the panther's family and the key to tipping the balance of power in their favor. Because of this, the tiger was shunned when he came back and told his story. Not because he killed their family member, but because he destroyed their weapon, and it'd be years before the next one would be ready. Even the people unaware of the apparent takeover disregarded him as nothing more than a common beast. They hated him because he prevented a war. Granted, they had no idea, it's just sort of ironic. But there was still one thing bothering the tiger. The lion had been hated by all, so why go through that trouble to save people that would have much rather seen him dead? The lion's reasoning was because he was going to be the one that brought the jungle to its knees, not that sneaky pack of panthers. He would be the one. Even though he did it for himself, the bad guy in the jungle saved the animals that lived there. And this is what you still don't get, little brother. All of your knowledge comes from people like these, who are seen as heroes. You embody these beliefs of courage, power, and self-sacrifice because you crave endearment. Naruto said. But you have to understand, there's a lot to learn from the words of a man who lurks in the shadows of righteousness. Menma shook his head vehemently. No, you're lying. He said it, mostly to try to convince himself. Minato and Kushina didn't say anything while they thought about what Naruto had said. The characters were obvious, but how could they possibly know if the story were true or not? Minato finally spoke up after he got some of his strength back. You believe that? He asked him, looking directly into the holes of his mask. Naruto gave him the same look. Perhaps I shouldn't, given his track record. But I do because of something from back then that I remember. My best friend's last words were what solidified it. He said, looking out towards the water. With a sword through his chest, Itachi's bloodied and beaten face rested on Naruto's shoulder. His onyx eyes looking at the tips of his blonde hair. Coughing out more blood, he grimaced, feeling the sword shaking within his body. With a shaky voice, barely even audible, he leaned into Naruto's ear. Before I go, remember my name. It was the only thing real in this friendship. Naruto's eyes expanded in realization of what that meant. His grip on the sword loosened until his hands dropped to his sides. Who was this? Who was this man on his shoulder? I'm sorry. The weight fell off his shoulder, and his best friend hit the ground. He stared at the wall in front of him, like a projector within his mind. He played out the scenes of their best moments. The training, the conversations, the book he got for his 12th birthday. He got down on his knees and hunched over, holding himself up with his hands. Slowly, a line of blood moved into his line of sight, and he looked at himself in the mirror. A tear fell from his eye and landed in the red liquid, making it ripple just a little bit. A slow chuckle caught his attention, being accented by a slow rhythmic clapping. And then there was one. As he stood up, Orochimaru said this in a slimy way. Naruto then just realized why he did what he did. He looked up and jerked when Sannin, the snake, cut Izumi's throat while he was bound and gagged. His sister's crying got his attention, so he crawled toward where she was. Maito, he called out desperately. When he finally looked her way, the crying stopped and her face began to distort into the image of that man. The well-known shinobi of Kusagakure 100 Transformation Kazan. You did well, Naruto, Orochimaru praised. It was a noble thing you've done today. You'll realize one day. He said this just before he went into the back room, with the rogue shinobi following him. Naruto was left there in the barrier, next to the dead bodies of his only two friends. What does that prove? Menma asked, not understanding how that explained anything. Naruto sighed and looked back over to him. On my 12th birthday, Itachi gave me a book. It was called On the Nature of Betrayal, a play that showed how a spy made up a friendship with his target. Remember my name before I leave. It was the only thing real in this friendship, he said, quoting the book just as Itachi had all those years ago. I feel a little foolish now. He gave me that almost like a joke between him and his family. Played me for a fool the whole time. All of this to make another shinobi like Itachi and get him to join their cause. Menma shook his head again. No, even so. That would have died when Itachi did. He said that to try and find flaws in the story. You said he was the key to tilting the power struggle, so with him gone, there would be no more plan, he argued. Naruto just gave a shoulder shrug. Menma, you're being taken for a fool, he said, shaking his head. Sam, you know it too. Do you remember that day on the balcony, when you wanted to talk to me after the 3-year training and all that? He asked. Minato stared at the water before him, recalling the conversation. Of course he remembered. When I told you those two will become something amazing one day. That's a lot how Itachi and I were. Oh, Minato did get the message. He couldn't say what Naruto was saying, but he knew what he was saying. He asked Naruto, how do you know all of this? Because he didn't know where Naruto got all of this information. Naruto shrugged again. I overthrew a very disappointing leader for his army of shinobi village haters, and he had a very extensive spy network. Devoted nuke ninja who were deeply woven into the underground of their villages. He said it offhand. I put together the pieces of information I had to get this information. What solidified it was the confirmation of a traitor among the group of traitors. A Hyuga, if you'd believe it. So the Hyuga are also against us? Menma asked, clearly not enjoying the upsetting news. Naruto shrugged as if telling him he would believe what he wished. God, Sam, you're not believing this right, he screamed at him. Minato had no words for the moment. It was too much to comprehend. I mean, being gone for 3 years, half the village could have turned on them. What would give Naruto a reason to lie? He made it clear before they even started this that he was possibly going to die today. So, why would he lie? I don't know, Menma, he said sadly. Menma stared at him, completely appalled that he would even dare consider it after everything that's happened. Naruto placed his palms on the surface of the violently shifting water and pushed up until his feet resurfaced. He stood back up onto the surface of the water, clearly ready to get back to the feet. Well, believe what you will, Menma. Heed my warning though. The life of a shinobi is shrouded in secrecy. For the sake of your wife and your daughter, do what you must, even if for a slight chance you think what I'm saying could be true. Don't risk it, he said. The 3 of them rose to the top of the water too and faced off against him, Menma's features completely distraught by the troubling news. Minato and Kushina stood a little further back behind him, staring at his back. Now, there was even more to worry about. No one knew yet if Naruto was telling the truth or not, but they would be careful when they got back. Well, that is, if they came back. Even though it was pouring down so hard, the rain did not stop the 3-on-1 standoff. The water they stood on bounced and rippled with the way of the storm. Even though there were flashes of lightning and loud thunder that they could feel in their chests, this did not make them feel better. With an undetermined or unannounced starting point, Menma created 2 clones and rushed forward along with one of them, beginning the battle to end it all. He jumped up into the air and faked a straight right hook. When Naruto moved in range to defend from it, he spun out of his previous attack and instead went for an overhead kick that was blocked all the same. Naruto pushed Menma into the air and then took a step back to avoid the chain that came out of the ground. Before his father could get to him, he jumped to the left. He twisted in the air to get out of the way of the clone of Menma that was running alongside him. Menma quickly gave chase, using the rapidly appearing chains of his mother to swing on. When he reached the redhead, he threw a string of punches his way that were all blocked before he was kicked away. Minato jumped over him while he was in the air and grabbed his hand to stop him from falling into the water. Then he went on. Naruto's clone of Menma was easy for him to get rid of. He lunged forward, avoiding the chains that were chasing him, and attacked his father. He threw a right hook, which was blocked with a grunt of effort. Then, he turned his body and used his right leg to throw a roundhouse kick, which was also blocked. He leaned back just as Menma came flying back in and hit him in the face. Now with 2 to defend, he leapt away and went through hand signs. 2 of his clones jumped out of the water. He briefly grabbed the back of their necks before the 3 of them split up. 2 of them went after a different opponent, and the 3rd went after Menma. Menma kicked out, dove under the punch, and rolled to his feet. Naruto turned around and caught the punch that was thrown at him quickly. He kicked him in the side, giving them some space. As soon as he did, he made more hand signs and jumped away, shooting out bullets of air that stirred up the water around them. Menma dodged all of the attacks as he went through his own hand signs. Menma threw his hand forward when Naruto landed. A big gust of wind blew the water in front of him away, and Naruto sank down into the dip and moved behind Menma. Knowing he would, Menma turned around and blocked the punch that almost caught him in the face. He tried to fight back with one of his own, but Naruto's left hand caught his wrist. Naruto then used his right hand to push Menma's jaw up, making it hard for him to move. He kicked him back into the water when he let him go. Menma went through a series of hand gestures and then slammed his hands on the surface of the water. Two small toads appeared out of a cloud of smoke. I need chakra, he said urgently. With a quick nod, the two old toads hopped onto his shoulders and built up the necessary nature chakra. Menma's eyes turned a deep shade of orange, and the lines in his pupils moved to the side. From each of his eyes to his jawline, two blue stripes moved down. Naruto watched with interest, but he didn't know that Menma had learned how to use Sage Chakra. Interesting, he said to himself in a low voice. Menma jumped and rushed forward a lot faster than he had been before. Naruto dropped into a taijutsu position and waited for him. Menma got close to him and threw a sloppy right hook, which Naruto dodged. Well, he thought he did until he felt something slam into the front of his mask. He was sent skipping back along the water. He got to his feet and squinted at the strange thing. He just shrugged it off and chose to block instead. As he ran toward Menma, he threw a roundhouse kick, which Menma dodged. When he landed, he threw up his arm to block the counter kick, which was so strong that it shook his arm. He pushed back with a grunt of effort and dodged the next blows. When he had a bit of freedom, he kicked him away, briefly disrupting the toad's continuous buildup of chakra. Using hand gestures, he jumped into the air and threw fireballs that stirred up the water around them. Menma used the cover to slip under the water and practice his own hand signs. Two of his shadow clones jumped out of the water and tried to grab Naruto by the ankles. Naruto had already seen them. They were quickly wiped out, and the smoke that came from it gave Menma the cover he needed as he moved the chakra ball forward. Naruto skillfully grabbed his wrist and turned his attack in a gentle way. Before he could finish killing the technique, his airborne father got close enough to hit him on the right shoulder with a clip. Naruto grimaced at the pain in the hurt part of his arm before the clone he was fighting pushed him down into the water by landing on his floating body. When he saw the tag he had put on his back, he tried to kick him, but it didn't take much for his leg to get caught. Shifting his body awkwardly, he spun the other way and actually landed with a brutal roundhouse that took the redhead off his feet. Surprisingly though, it didn't disperse. Did that mean he was fighting the original? He jumped back from the enemy's counterattack and looked over to see Menma hit his Naruto with a pretty strong blow that also didn't get rid of. When Menma was being wise, it was very unlikely that would happen. He landed and rolled backwards as he pulled out the last of his kunai. When he got back on his feet, he started running along the water. He jumped from right to left to avoid the small balls of fire that shot toward him and seemed to merge or curve around him for a short distance. When Naruto saw that he was avoiding all of the attacks, he changed his strategy and fell back into the water. Naruto stopped when he saw that he wasn't being chased anymore. He lunged backwards, though, just as the huge water dragon screamed out of the water below him. The dragon followed him for a few seconds before plunging nose first into the water and scattering in a shower that looked like rain. Now, he was in trouble because he didn't know where Naruto was. When he had a moment away from the battle, he looked around and was amazed to see what looked like copies of Naruto. Kushina even had her chain through the arm of hers. They should have been long gone. That's when he remembered the footage he watched on Naruto and Itachi's Chunin exam battle. These were the best copies of Naruto, but they seemed to be much stronger than they were back then. So, how would they kill them? It looked like normal wounds wouldn't help. They might have had to kill them. He saw that they moved much more slowly than the real one, so it should be easy. He got closer to the ground and drew his kunai. Nenma's punch still hurt his right arm, but he would just have to fight through it. He jumped up, feeling the water shift beneath his feet. Sure enough, Naruto jumped out and ran straight at him. Minato cut and slashed at him, but Naruto was able to easily avoid them with his skill. Minato tried to hit Naruto from above, but Naruto grabbed his wrist and gave him a very powerful roundhouse that sent him back across the water. Before he kicked him, Naruto grabbed the kunai out of his hand and sent it flying after him. As soon as he saw it, he stuck his arm out and hit the blonde man in the face. Minato picked his face up out of the water and rolled forward and away from his own blade that was driving down to him. Naruto took a small step back as he threw the kunai into the air. Minato ran to it and grabbed it in a flash. He turned around and saw Naruto finish a set of hand signs and then shoot a fireball at his unprotected body. He threw his kunai down into the water and flashed to it. Before he could get back to the surface, another Naruto grabbed his ankle and began to pull him down. Minato tried to get out of the hold, but she couldn't. The clone hit him with kicks and punches that were hard to avoid because he needed air quickly. After he kicked him away, he was scared when the other Naruto jumped into the water and went straight for him. Now, he was really in trouble. Again, his ankle was grabbed. Thinking quickly, he twisted down into an awkward position and stabbed the clone in the head. For a second or two, the blood poured out along with the rising bubbles. Then, the clone broke apart in a burst of even more bubbles. Minato used it as a distraction to swim up and kick the other clone away before coming up for air and taking a big breath. He looked around making sure everyone else was still okay. Menma was getting handled a bit, but Kushina was doing alright, keeping her distance and utilizing her chains. He got kicked in the jaw by the redhead he didn't know had returned because he wasn't paying attention to their fight. He quickly jumped from the water and blocked the next kick with a grunt of effort. He had learned how to kill them. Before they could spread out, their brain had to die. So, if he could even hit them hard enough to stop their heart, the clone would eventually break apart. It might take a few minutes. Dodging another attack, he sunk beneath the strike and sliced at his thigh. The attack just missed by a hair or two, and he got a hard knee to the face as punishment. Once he was back on his feet, he jumped forward and tried to drop kick the clone. Naruto moved slightly out of the way, which made Minato's feet slide onto the side of his shoulder. Naruto grabbed him and pulled him down until his head went under the water. Minato cut himself free by cutting his ankle. The clone of Naruto fell backwards and grimaced in pain, but he kept fighting anyway. Minato jumped up and almost got away from the second water dragon that flew out. Naruto jumped towards his airborne form and hit him across the jaw and plucked the kunai from his hands again. Minato got back on his feet and quickly moved to the seal on Naruto's back, which he used to choke him. Naruto tried to reach up and stab him, but Minato tightened his grip and Naruto's neck broke with a loud snap. When they finally hit the water, Minato pushed the body off of him and it began to sink. With a sigh of relief, he stood back to his feet and rushed for Menma's battle, seeing that he needed some help. When he left, he didn't notice the big group of bubbles that came up when the clone broke up deep below. Kushina was angry that the clone didn't even try to attack her, so she chased it around. He just continued dodging her attacks as closely as he could. It seemed like he was trying to stay close to them on purpose, like he was taking a look at them. Naruto landed a little bit away and got down on his knees. Kushina stopped and looked at him, wondering what he was doing. He put his hand up and looked at the palm of his hand. Slowly, and to her surprise, a sharp tip like the one on her chain started to rise from his palm before going away. He tried it again and got a little more out before it fizzled out again. He gave it one more try, and this time a blue chain came up from his hand instead of the yellow one she had. He was up to it. So that's what it was, he said, standing to his feet. When I was younger, I read the Uzumaki scrolls in the library. I was able to figure out most of the techniques, but I could never get this one. Seeing it in action has taught me what I was doing wrong. He said that he would tell her how he did it. Kushina's eyes grew as in a moment of irony. A blue chain came soaring from beneath her. She jumped back and sent out one of her own chains to block it. Naruto created one in each hand and rushed forward. He swiped away the multiple attacks from his mother, even using her chains to get to her faster. As soon as he got close enough, he started to swing his own. Kushina, on the other hand, was much better at using the technique, as she completely destroyed him. He jumped back and went through hand signs. The water around Kushina began to swirl into a whirlpool to her surprise. He even learned this technique. It was one of the hardest things to learn, if not the hardest thing. She jumped back and away from it before she was pulled into its current. If he truly knew the technique, then she was in much more trouble than she previously thought. Sure enough, she saw what followed the raging waters as from the violently twisting rapids, water dragons began spitting from its sides. She jumped out of the way of the first attack and saw that the same one had come back to attack her. This was the origin of the technique of the water dragon itself. On the first attack, these wouldn't go away. They wouldn't disperse unless the user was disrupted. She jumped out of the way of the next attack and looked over to see that Naruto was still on his knees with his hands on the ground. Menma and Minato were going to have to deal with 2 more dragons. Before she touched down, she heard a cry from behind her. Thinking quickly, she covered herself in her chains and flew into the mouth of the beast. While she was there, she violently spun her body, which caused the chains to break the water and give her time to get out. Going through hand signs, she spewed out an air bullet that flew for the redhead. Before it reached, another dragon leapt from the whirlpool, blocking the attack. She squinted her eyes and continued jumping away from the beasts. Know that it would be a bad idea to go underwater. Minato and Menma continuously hurtled away from the attacks of the durable water dragons that continued to attack them while simultaneously dodging the attacks of the original Naruto. Minato knew about the technique because he had heard Kushina talk about it, but Menma was blown away. He yelled to his father from a distance, "How do we beat these?" Minato really didn't know what to do with that one. Up until now, he had never even seen the jutsu in action. Jumping from one of the dragons, he leaned back, avoiding Naruto, who came in with a flying spinning back kick. Before he could answer, he was falling towards the open mouth of the other water dragon. Its red eyes pierced his own with an ominous intent. Minato could see that its body was curling up like a snake getting ready to strike. He couldn't feel his kunai anywhere, so he knew that Menma had it. When the dragon lunged, he was sure that was it for him, but a chain wrapped around his abdomen and pulled him out of the path of the beast. Kushina pulled him and Menma back far enough that the dragons couldn't venture. The original Naruto stood on the head of one of them and looked out at them while his clone kept the jutsu going. From Menma's shoulder, Ma asked, "There are two of them." "Yes, one is an exact copy." Menma told her this in response. Pa looked at Kushina and Minato with a puzzled look on his face. "Why is it still alive? From here, I can see that it is bleeding," he said, looking at the clone Naruto's bleeding arm from when Kushina had pierced it. "Those aren't like other clones, Pa," Minato replied while trying to get his breath back. "They are perfect clones, so the brain has to die before they can go their separate ways," he said. "This is how I see it." "Wow, what sort of strategy is that? That's amazing," Ma said in astonishment. "Even the amount of chakra they have is the same." She spoke a little more quietly, still trying to figure out what she could from the two. Minato was surprised by that. "How come their chakra is the same?" he asked in amazement. That couldn't be true. All clones only received a portion of the original's chakra, depending on how much chakra was used. With these being as sturdy as they were, it was unlikely that it would have as much chakra as the original, especially given how many he made. "Yeah, and it's monstrous, much like Kushina's." She said that she could feel it more. "That's our son," we said. She told them a little more about what was going on. Pa and Ma gave each other a confused look and then shrugged. They'd seen stranger things. Menma saw how patient Naruto was while he was waiting. It was almost mocking how lax he was taking this entire battle. "Hey, anyone know how to end that jutsu of his?" he asked in slight irritation. "We need to make the caster mad." Kushina told them about it. "The clone is maintaining it and we can't get close because of the nest." She said this as she tried to think of a way to do it. "Nest? What home?" Menma asked. Minato pointed over to the clone Naruto, more directly, the whirlpool in front of him. "It's a technique used by the Uzumaki. They call it the nest of the water dragons. It's a nest full of water dragons, just like the name says." He said something that amazed the blonde. "Wow, I don't know how he knows something like that," he asked with a hint of awe. Kushina gave a nod. "I'm not sure. The scroll from Uzu didn't really tell them where to go, so I never learned it. Naruto's a genius," she admired. Minato nodded. "Yeah, well," he said while standing. "We have to push our way through that muddle," he said using hand signals. In a huge poof of smoke, Gamabunto appeared beneath them all. The giant toad quickly adjusted to the environment and stuck to the top of the water's surface. "Hey, Minato, what the hell do you need? It's raining out here," he yelled, looking across at the horde of water dragons. "I'm sorry, Bunta," Minato said. "We can't get through that mess without you," he said, showing respect to his summons. "Erg," the toad made a noise. "Was that all?" he asked with a grimace. "Yes, Bunta," said a voice the giant knew, which sent chills down his spine. "That's everything." The huge toad pulled out his sword. "You certainly, Ma. I had no idea you were also here." He said it in a shy way. "Go," he shouted, and the others clung to his head with chakra and took off at full speed. Menma stepped up to his snout and got his attention. "Bunta, give me some oil," he yelled, receiving a nod of confirmation. When they came within range, Bunta spewed out a stream of the black liquid that surrounded the group of dragons. A water dragon jumped out of the water and caught the toad's leg before he could jump away. He stretched out the arm and cut the neck off of the spiraling water structure. When they were out of reach, Menma threw a ball of fire toward the edge of the dark water. The surface of the water and the dragons were quickly swallowed in flames. It was quickly doused by the rainwater, however, and Bunter rushed forward while the surface was clear of the water beasts. He skidded to a stop before hitting the whirlpool that was between him and what seemed to be his target. When the toad briefly looked down into it, another group of water dragons jumped out of the nest and wrapped themselves around the toad, making it hard for him to move. "Menma," Minato yelled, looking down to the kunai. Menma nodded and threw it as hard as he could towards the crouched blonde. Before it got there, another one ate it and then went back into the water. They were now completely out of kunai, which made them grimace. Kushina was thinking of not only a way around them, but also on the fact that they lost sight of the original. Just as she was thinking that, he landed behind her. She put her arms up to block the punch, which made her fall backwards into Minato, who turned around and caught her. Putting her down, he ran forward and attacked the redhead while Menma focused on getting to the clone. Bunta, he yelled at the giant toad, who was trying to get out of the dragon's tight grip. Disperse, he yelled. The giant toad did what they asked without saying a word and vanished in a huge cloud of smoke, leaving the others to fall freely to the water below. Minato dove into the water and quickly came back up before the water dragons, which were now free, shot at him. He was too busy avoiding the beasts to notice Naruto until it was too late. He was kicked away from the other people in a very painful way, getting to his feet with a grimace at the pain. He picked his head up to look at Naruto, who landed gracefully in front of him. Standing to his feet, he looked past him at Kushina and Menma, who were still trying to get to the clone. "Don't worry about them," Naruto said, walking forward. "They'll be busy for a while." Minato put himself in a fighting stance and got ready. He asked him quickly, "Why haven't you killed us yet?" Naruto rushed him and delivered the first strike that slipped past his head. Minato tried to counter with a hook of his own, but Naruto blocked it with his elbow. "What makes you so sure I could?" he asked him in curiosity, blocking the roundhouse kick and kicking him in the stomach. Picking himself up, Minato shrugged. "Just a hunch," he said. This as a glob of blood came out of his mouth. When he got back on his feet, he rushed forward and dove under the punch that was coming for his face. By coincidence, beneath his feet he saw his kunai. Sinking down, he grabbed it and shot back up behind the redhead. Naruto turned around as casual as ever. Minato created a Rasengan and threw his kunai forward. Naruto rushed him and leaned his head out of the way of the kunai. When he did, he flipped up with his back to the water and hit his father beneath his armpit, killing his attack off instantly. Minato landed on the water's surface and stared down at his limp arm. He looked towards the other battle and noticed how he couldn't make out any of the figures or what all was happening. Ignoring it for now, he stood back to his feet and turned around, just in time before Naruto came in for a knee to his face. He swiveled out of the way of the flying attack and countered with a kick of his own that was blocked with relative ease. His limp arm being useless for the moment, he was unable to block the kick coming to his face. It made him move like a flat stone across the water. When he stood back up, he was kicked in the face and pushed even farther away. Through the rain, he could see a small island behind him. He shook his head and turned around, only to get kicked again. After the third defenseless attack, Naruto tilted his head and looked at the blonde man. He didn't seem as though he was trying anymore. He was just taking a beating at this point. He went up to him slowly to see what he would do. Minato stood up and put his one good arm up into a lazy stance. Even though he didn't look too tired, he was breathing pretty hard. Naruto looked at the arm that he had broken. As he ran at him, he poked him in the nose, grabbed the hurt part, and pushed Minato's face away. He kicked him back when he let him go. Minato cut his chakra and fell down when he could finally see the ground. The water went up to his knees and no further. The fairly small island behind him. Stretching out, he noticed his arm was better. Did Naruto heal it? As he got closer, Naruto kept looking at him to see what was going on. Minato once more put his hands up in a sloppy way. Naruto stopped so close to him that he could reach out and touch him. In a sudden and very unexpected moment, Naruto reached across and slapped him. Minato's eyes grew wide with surprise. Minato tried to fix himself and threw a very sloppy punch at Naruto. Naruto grabbed it easily and snapped his arm at the forearm. Minato tried to hold back his scream before he was kicked back and his back hit a rock behind him. He moaned as he slid down his back and sat on his butt, his left arm clutching the broken appendage in pure pain. Naruto didn't move from where he was. He just stood there and looked at him. "You didn't want them to know about it," Naruto said in a tone that showed he understood while he walked up to him and stood right in front of him. Minato didn't say anything back, he just looked at him. There was nothing on his face that made sense. Often when a warrior's life is at its end, he wishes to repent for his sins in whatever way he may see fit. "And you believe by having me do it, you are cleansing your mistakes." He didn't need to say anything. Naruto read him like a book. It was like he knew the answers to his own questions that he hadn't asked, and he knew them just by watching them fight. He was still having short, choppy breaths, but he didn't seem to be in much pain. "I don't know what you would like for me to tell you to get you to understand that I truly hold no animosity to you or Kase. I understand everything that happened and I don't blame you." He said this when he was being honest. Minato's eyes glossed over and he stared out into the distance, faintly being able to see the battle still raging on in the distance. The rain lit up in flashes of blue and red according to their attacks. He could just barely make out Kushina and Menma's shapes. "I know," he managed to get out amidst his still very choppy breathing. But I blame me. I'm to blame for everything. Naruto didn't answer. Instead, he chose to listen. For everything wrong I've done in this life. Forgetting you has been the one mistake that has plagued my mind for years. I didn't sleep a single night without thinking about you, Naruto, what I did to you. He drawled off, his features contorting, signifying he was in tears. It won't matter, I know it won't, though, but Naruto, I am so proud of you. No matter what you have become, I'll always be happy with you. He said it out loud, letting his feelings show. Naruto listened, unsure of what to call the feeling that was rising up inside him. He got down on his knees and looked at Minato, who had his eyes closed and was crying very loudly. Never before had he seen him like this. In all the years he had known the family, he had never seen him cry, but this was real emotion coming out of him. Seeing movement in his peripheral, Minato looked up to see Naruto's hand covering the mouth of his mask. He slowly took it off his face and threw it in the muddy sand next to him. Even more tears came out of Minato's eyes. His shaky hand came up slowly and caressed the face of his firstborn child. Memories kept flooding into his mind like waves of regret that never stopped coming. Ha ha ha. Too-san, let me go. Naruto laughed and yelled 3, as he tried to get his father's tickling hands off of him. Minato made monster sounds while he unmercifully attacked the boy's sides. RRRGH. Oh no, he's gonna tickle him to death. He yelled out in a comical voice. When Naruto finally got away from him, he ran through their backyard looking for the weapon he had just thrown away. Minato chased after it on his knees, spreading his hands wide and making sounds like the monster he was trying to act out. Naruto laughed as he made his way to the small plastic sword that was lying in the grass. Finally reaching it, he turned around and pointed it towards his father with an awful attempt at a serious face, for the giggles refused to leave him. He yelled, "Get back, monster," with a laugh and no sense of bravado in his voice. Minato did a great job of playing the part by putting his hands up and backing up slowly. "Oh no, don't. I'll never make those people laugh again," he said, trying to suppress his own fit of laughter. The next thing Naruto said made him laugh out loud. "I know, because you already tickle them," he said with a giggle as he ran toward her. Minato laughed at the horrible hero exclamation, which was full of bad grammar, and fell on his back, catching the blonde boy as he jumped onto his stomach. He rolled over a few times, tickling him along the way, before stopping with Naruto laying on his chest as if to pin him down. They couldn't stop laughing because the new game was just too funny. Minato was amazed as he looked into Naruto's blue eyes. This was his son. From the eyes to the face to the hair, everything. It was like a carbon copy of what he looked like when he was younger, with the addition of whiskers, of course. But this was his son. He didn't think it was true. "Oh no," a new voice said from the porch. The two looked up to see Kushina holding a piece of paper. She looked very surprised and a little bit scared. Minato gently moved the blonde boy off of him and then stood up. "Hey, what's going on?" he asked, getting to her side trying to see what was on the paper. To his surprise, it was empty. Naruto looked at the two before shoving a hand in his pocket and turning to go play by himself again. Kushina just shook her head. I don't know," she said. "It says here that the brave knight Naruto didn't actually beat up the wicked witch." As soon as she said that, Naruto turned his head back to look. "It says that she is now working with the tickling tyrant and that they are both coming to get him," she said as she and Minato ran after the blonde boy, who was again laughing uncontrollably. After all these years, this is still that face, a lot more tired and a lot sadder. Minato scratched his cheek and let his tears flow freely. No filter for who was around to see him. "And so sorry, Naruto," he said. "I love you." Naruto didn't say a thing. He stared into the crying face of his father, memorizing the wear and tear that life had on such a seemingly happy individual. Goes to show that the saddest ones leave the least clues. With a heavy heart full of sadness and regret for the man he still called Too-san, he stabbed him in the stomach with the kunai he had thrown away. Minato moved closer to Naruto and put his bloody chin on his shoulder, still mouthing the words "I love you," determined to say it for all those years he didn't. "You too, Too-san. You too," Naruto whispered as he put him against the boulder and laid him back. He grabbed his mask and held it out in front of him, letting the rain wash off the mud clinging to its edges. He stared at the design on the front, remembering why he got it. If the world would laugh at him, then he would laugh right back. What should he have done if it cried for him? Well, that was something new. He tilted his head back and shut his eyes, letting the rain wash off anything that made it onto his face by any unintentional means. Listening to the calming sounds of the thunder and rain, barely realizing that he could no longer hear the sounds of water dragons. He turned around and looked out over the water, but he didn't see or hear any more flashes or explosions. Finally, through the beating rain, he could see his mother and brother running towards the island. Menma must have felt the loss of Minato's chakra signature through his Sage mode. Naruto smiled and thought to himself how much he's changed. After putting on his mask, he pushed his hair back and away from his face by running his hand through it. "What'll you do now, Menma?" he asked his question to the wind. He saw his brother and mother for the first time. "Minato," Kushina slowly called out to him when he was still against the rock. Her brow furrowed because she wasn't ready to accept the inevitable. She conjured a chakra chain and swiped it at Naruto, making him jump away. Menma and Kushina ran to the dead body when he did. "Tusan, hey, Tusan," he yelled and slapped himself several times. Kushina leaned in close and put her ear to his heart, hoping to hear something. She tried desperately to hit him on the other side, as if that would get him going again or something. "Tusan, get up," Menma said, his voice cracking. This was definitely a sight to see had there been any onlookers. A cage and tears. Yet, it happened twice today. Kushina had lost her temper a long time ago. She was screaming her husband's name, hoping he would hear her and wake up. Naruto stood back and watched, thinking about how he felt about the situation and wondering why it didn't affect him. I mean, he still considered these people to be family, yet watching his father die, by his own hands no less, he felt nothing. As if he took the life of a complete stranger. Did that make him a monster? In a book he read one time, that's what the author said. A real monster is someone who can hurt his family and still be sane. Well, maybe he wasn't sane. All this time, he accepted the title of psychopath, because that's what the world decided to label him as. But he didn't truly think he was one. Not until now. He just took the life of his father, and felt absolutely nothing from it. That had to mean something. Ino told him once that he was just a man who liked to walk with crazy people. A man who could hear the whispers of the demented and decode the babbling of the schizophrenics. Was that supposed to be a good thing? Whatever it was meant to be. It clearly didn't sit right with the blonde cage who was now pacing towards him with his head down. "Why?" Menma asked, and his hollow voice was filled with anger. Even though he knew this could happen, he never thought, how could you kill your own dad? Naruto was tearing himself apart with that question as well. Regardless, it was necessary. Well, it's just like killing anyone else. He still bleeds, though. He replied with a snarky comment. "You scum," Menma yelled out, clenching his hands shut tightly. Naruto watched him, knowing full well what he had coming his way. "You're too naive, Menma," he called out casually. "All that power you have. But you are so weak, you know why that is, don't you?" he asked, not receiving an answer. "You're too good, too noble and too kind." Menma didn't seem interested in hearing anything Naruto said as he dropped to his knees, digging his hands in the mud. "I've been saying all day that you and your people have put you on a pedestal like a god who can do anything. But god and human are two different words for a reason. Because a god can't be all-powerful if he or she has useless qualities like kindness and nobility. There are too many different ideas in the world for a kind god to answer all prayers." Menma was still hunched down in the sand and hadn't moved yet. "So I'll say it again, you're no god. You're just a human." As soon as that left his mouth, his mask was completely shattered by the red-eyed Menma, whose features became a lot more feral. Naruto flipped backwards until he hit a group of trees, which hurt him all over. With a grunt of effort, he made it back to his feet. Menma was already on him as soon as he did. Naruto decided being out in open water would be about the worst thing at the moment when dealing with a tailed beast. So, instead of running away, he ran into the trees, where he could hide from his animalistic brother. Swinging from a tree, he was tackled out of the air and into the ground. Sticking his arm up, he tried to block the right slash at his face, but the force of the hit itself threw him off to the side. As soon as he stood up, he moved out of the way to avoid the flying kick that knocked over the small tree next to him. Menma turned around and kept attacking him, but he had nothing but anger to fuel his hatred at the time. Naruto was hard-pressed trying to dodge all of his attacks, but he miraculously succeeded to some extent, until he finally got Menma's guard down so he could strike himself. He hit Menma in the cheek with his fist, breaking his own wrist in the process. He was thrown back by the shock, and part of his body went through the tree behind him. As long as he had time, he fixed his hurt wrist while dodging attacks from all sides. The rain was making it hard for him to use many of his senses, which made it hard for him to see in the forest. Dropping down quickly, he created a regular shadow clone before taking off, avoiding Menma's next strike. He had a plan, but he needed to buy some time. He did exactly that from there, avoiding Menma's attacks and keeping him away from his clone. Menma was too far gone to even recognize as an orange hue of bubbling chakra covered his body with a tail sprouting from his backside. At this point, Naruto sighed and felt a bit tired. Naruto jumped away to avoid a long orange claw that pulled the tree he was hiding behind out of the ground. He rolled forward and laid flat to avoid the next blow. Before the claw could crush the ground under him, he jumped up quickly. While in the air, there was nothing keeping him from harm's way. Menma's chakra fist punched him hard, sending him flying through the thick vegetation and breaking more than just trees along the way. When he finally stopped, he lifted his head until the top of Menma's foot was in his line of sight. His body was again thrown away. He didn't stop until his back hit the rock behind him. Before his body even started to fall, Menma sped in and smashed him into the stone wall. He grabbed Naruto's front shirt, pulled him off the rock, and tore it before throwing him to the ground. Naruto was still thrown a few feet across the muddy floor, which covered his now naked chest in dirt. He got back on his feet with a grunt that seemed to show pain. He spit out the blood and got in a fighting position. Menma was just a few feet away, crouched down and ready to attack. He ran on all fours, kicking up mud behind him, and hit Naruto with a wild slash. Naruto moved out of the way and hit him in the side with a punch. Menma ignored the hit and brought the same arm back, trying to catch him with an elbow. Naruto leaned out the way of the strike and gave him 2 quick jabs to his abdomen. Menma took the blows and went after him again with his sword. Before he could, Naruto turned around and kicked him in the throat, stopping the roar. Menma kept going and hit Naruto in the face, even though he had already been hit. Naruto fell down, but he got back up quickly. He kicked off the tree next to him and clotheslined the cage until they both fell to the ground to avoid Menma's next few attacks. Menma seemed angry at the move and tried to get back on his feet as fast as he could. Naruto did as well and rushed forward. Menma also ran after him and tackled him to the ground. Holding him there, raising his clawed hand, he brought it down, driving straight through his chest. Naruto disappeared in a cloud of smoke, and then the real one came out of the ground and kicked Menma forward. Menma rolled around until he was standing again. Turning to the redhead, he roared before he sunk deeper into his crouch. Naruto stood back and watched Menma's skin start to peel off, revealing a dark red chakra structure underneath. When it was all gone, all that was left was a deep red chakra figure with white eyes that seemed to just squint at him. Behind him, 4 tails waved. Naruto did not seem deterred. He got back into his stance and ran forward when the animal did. Surprisingly, he couldn't find him. He was now going too fast. He slid down out of instinct, sending Menma flying over him and into a tree. Now that he was close, he rushed forward before he could catch his breath. When he punched the creature with no skin, his fist burned. He went backwards and made hand signs to shake it off. Taking a deep breath, he fired small fireballs at the beast, which just kept dodging them with ease. He used the branches to get higher and higher as he jumped up. He kicked back and away from the top branch to avoid the black ball that was coming at him. As he went down, he stared up at the explosion that lit up the sky and stopped the rain for a moment. When he was done being amazed by how powerful the Kyuubi was, he turned around to land right, but he saw Menma get right under him. He quickly made another shadow clone and had it throw him back toward the tree. He used his chakra to stick to it and watched as Menma also stuck to it and started running up its side. Cutting his chakra, he began falling towards the figure he couldn't identify properly as his brother. When he opened his hand, he made a Rasengan, which quickly turned into a small white wind blade that made a screeching sound. Menma was so far gone that he couldn't even tell which attacks were dangerous and which ones weren't. He did what he did out of pure anger. When Menma got close, Naruto moved his arm forward. Rasengan, which was made stronger by the wind, slammed into Menma's chest, making the monster scream in pain. He was thrown to the ground painfully but got to his feet almost immediately. After the attack, Naruto got back on his feet and clung to the side of a tree. He looked down at the animal, which had already started to run back up. As he went through the hand signs, he put out his palm. Due to the weather, the most useful attack of the day was a water dragon that rushed forward from the water around it. Menma roared and slashed his claw at the head of the beast. It did break it up, but when the water crashed down on him, he had to look away from his opponent for a moment. Naruto got on his knees and put both of his feet into the beast's face. This sent both of them flying to the ground. Menma quickly got back on his feet and grabbed Naruto's foot before he could get up. He spun around violently before releasing the redhead, flinging him through multiple trees. He stood back up and moved out of the way of Menma's lunge. He decided that he couldn't just stay on the defensive, so he rushed forward and made a bunch of regular shadow clones that lunged at the cage, whose chakra was covering him. The beast cut and scratched at them, but it didn't know which one was real. Before the next attack, they all scattered into white clouds that blocked his view. The real Naruto moved around among the other people, keeping his distance and wondering where the other clone was. When he saw Menma killing clone after clone, he looked around and tried to come up with a plan. With nothing around to use, he resigned to the inevitability of having to deal with this head-on. He laughed at the situation and shrugged as he rushed forward with the clones. The group threw everything they had at the chakra structure until only Naruto and 5 of his clones were left standing. They all took their places around the animal-like thing. Menma was waiting in a low position with his claws dug into the mud. With a roar, he rushed forward, slashing at one that dispersed in a cloud. He turned around and faced the ball of flames straight on. He only covered his eyes before roaring at the person who had attacked him. He moved quickly and destroyed that one, too. Even though the ground beneath him was mud, it became much more liquid, and he started to sink in. He grabbed the sides and yelled in anger as he went down. Just as his head was about to go under, he filled his lungs with air, and let out a scream that was so loud that it pushed the mud back around him and let him jump out. When he did, he looked for Naruto and ran toward the first one he saw. That one spread out just as easily, but then it was attacked by a mud dragon that shot at it and threw it back. He went back to his crouching position with a roar and quickly killed 2 more clones before turning his attention to a third. As he ran toward it, he hit it in the stomach and threw it back. The beast knew it was the real one because it didn't run away. As it ran forward, it hit a tree to get out of the way and then kept running. Naruto jumped from tree to try to get away from the red chakra hue. When the branch he was about to land on broke, he dropped down to the ground and slammed his hands on the floor. Instantly, a mud wall shot up. Menma didn't let it stop him. He ran toward it and broke through it. When he did that, he lost track of his goal. Naruto let him know he was there when he jumped down and hit him in the back of the head with an axe kick. True to its animalistic ways, the beast shook the hit off and grabbed at Naruto's leg and flung him through the remaining bits of the wall. Before he could get up, he was grabbed again and thrown further into the woods. Naruto fell flat on his back and looked up at the sky. He couldn't think straight, and he kept wondering what time it must be. It was definitely getting close to sunset. When he finally came to, he stood up and saw Menma running toward him. His entire body was in pain, but he got into his stance nonetheless. Menma let out another roar and ran forward. Naruto rolled backwards and kicked the beast over his head. Menma ran into a tree, but he got back up quickly. He tried to catch Naruto again. Naruto gently leaned out of the way of the strike, sending the rage-filled creature stumbling past him. When Menma turned around, he had a look of anger in his white eyes that was bubbling out of control. Naruto didn't care, he just stayed where he was. Menma roared and crouched down. When Naruto opened his mouth, he could see chakra gathering in front of him. He realized that this was the same method as before, getting ready to try and end the technique early. He sighed in relief seeing movement behind the beast. Menma was just seconds away from swallowing the ball of concentrated chakra when the red chakra around him spread out completely, taking the ball with it. The badly hurt body of Menma fell to the ground in the mud. He looked shocked, with his eyes and mouth wide open. Naruto put his backside down and looked at the clone behind him. He gave him a nod, and the clone went away, sending him its memories. The seal he put on his back would keep the beast from coming near him for the next 24 hours. He had to make it so that the seal would soak into Menma's skin. This is why it took so long. No matter what, the clone did it. Naruto had a hard time getting up. He got down on his knees next to Menma and rolled him over onto his back. He put his green glowing hands over his chest. His breathing was very heavy as he spoke. He said, "Oh no, Hokage, we're not done yet," and kept going. Menma's skin began to lose its red color slowly but surely. Because he was in pain, a grimace formed on his face. When Naruto had finally healed him enough, he stepped back, letting the rain wake him up. Menma's eyes briefly opened, and then he closed them and put his forearm over them to protect them from the raindrops. He rolled over and got up on his bottom to look around. Finally remembering what happened before he had lost it, he looked over to see Naruto leaning against a tree, trying to heal himself. With a painful groan, he tried to stand before ultimately failing. "Why didn't you kill me?" he asked, straining his voice in pain. Naruto just looked at the blonde with eyes that didn't care about her. "If that was my goal, I would have done it," he said in that mysterious way that Menma didn't like. He looked back at him while shaking his head in anger and shock. "Then what the fuck are you trying to do?" he asked in a sharp tone. "Huh? Because it doesn't make any goddamn sense from where I'm standing." Naruto spit out the blood resting in his mouth. "My goal is to get you to understand." "Oh, don't give me that garbage," Menma said quickly. "What the hell is this all for? To show that you're better than me? Huh? Is that it?" Naruto just looked at him blankly, as if he had just said something strange. "You want to show everyone how far you can go on your own, so you do all this. Killing a cage, attacking villages, killing your own father, killing my father." Still, Naruto remained quiet, staring at him as if he were a piece of art that he simply couldn't understand. As if he had a philosophical brain teaser plastered on his forehead that he just couldn't figure out. "Do you even know what you've done, or are you too fucking crazy to even understand that?" When he didn't get an answer, Menma was furious. Do you even give a fucking? Naruto turned around and backed up against the tree. He looked straight ahead at the ground. For a second, Menma thought he was actually feeling a bit of remorse. But just for a moment, slowly, a smile began to creep its way onto his face. His mouth opened with a laugh. Heh, heh, heh. He chuckled more. Heh, heh, ha, ha, ha. He began laughing. Ha, ha, ha. He bellowed out in uncontrollable laughter, lifting his head up and laughing into the sky. Menma watched him with an angry scowl on his face. For the first time ever, he knew for sure that Naruto had lost his mind. He had lost all sense of reality. He couldn't even get a word in until Naruto's laughter finally died out. What the hell is so funny about any of this? Naruto's chuckles were still present, finding whatever he was laughing at just a bit too funny. When he finally contained his laughter to a degree, he answered him. He was completely serious when he said, "Ha, ha, I was just thinking that this would make a great book." Menma shook his head at him. "You're a sick maniac and totally crazy." He gave him a smile. "Oh, but I'm not," he said, stepping away from the tree, somewhat painfully. "No, I'm actually, if you'd believe me, completely sane. In fact, I'm much more sane than most." Menma chuckled at that, jokingly of course. "Huh, that's the dumbest thing you've said all day. And trust me, there's a list." Naruto smiled at the clever comment and went on. "No, really," he said. "I am. In fact, I dare venture into saying that. You're the crazy one." Menma smiled and shook his head. This was a new level of deranged he had never seen. "Oh really?" he asked with a condescending tone. "I'm the one who's quite possibly plunged the world into its fourth great war for absolutely no reason." Naruto moved his head to the right and then to the left. "Well, no. But on the same note, neither have I," he said, pissing him off even more. "When you say for no reason at all, that's your opinion. Just because your simple mind can't figure out why, doesn't mean there isn't a reason. And you just think you're so fucking brilliant, huh?" he asked in a childish way that made Naruto grin. "About the situation, yes, it was brilliant. I didn't mean to insult your intelligence, Menma. Your naivety has become your biggest weakness, which is why you didn't listen to my warning. Because your warning is misguided," he replied immediately, showing how sure he was in what he was saying. "The people of Konoha are good people. Showing distrust to someone is what drives a wedge through the bond we all share, and I know your game plans," he said as if he were right on the money. Naruto did nothing but look at him and wait for him to explain. "Knowing you, it's probably some kind of scheme to make us drive ourselves apart, and I won't fall for it." Naruto just shrugged. He told her, "You'll know in time, and it might be sooner than you think, with the coming war about to start. Those wars have nothing to do with Konoha. We will not attack unless we are attacked, and I will let the other villages know that we are remaining neutral," he stated. He said to himself in a low voice, "If I try, I'm sure I can reach the Kazekage before he does something stupid." Naruto just shook his head. "You're foolish, Menma, and your people will pay for it," he said in disappointment. "When I started this, I thought you were just a bystander in this cycle they made, a simple pawn who didn't know what he was doing. Now I know that you are the worst of them all." "The worst of who?" he asked, since they were on different pages. He said, "You're the worst of these peacekeepers. You're more than just naive and stupid. You really believe in this theory of order that they made up. You think you rule the people with compassion and cooperation, but in reality, you rule them with fear and tyranny." He tried to defend himself by saying, "I run the village with only kindness." Naruto groaned. "Not those people, Menma," he said, rubbing at his head. "I mean the rest of them. The other villages. The criminals outside of your walls. The individuals who would much rather see the village fall. Whether you've noticed or not, they all bend to your will. The will of the Hokage. You rule those people through fear of power that isn't even yours alone. They fear the prowess of the people under your command, but God. If they only knew how divided they truly are. I don't rule those people. I defend the village from them by any means necessary." Naruto said, "Wrong again." "No, you only believe you do. The problem resides in the fact that there are 4 more individuals who believe they do the same." "Well, 3 others," he said with a grin. "This world has become nothing but a constant struggle for power. There is no life in a world like this. Life no longer exists. There is only existence, and it is being wasted on people who would rather kill each other over what they don't have than enjoy what they do have." "You seem to love life a lot for someone who hates the world," Menma teased. Naruto chuckled. No. I would rather die than stay in a world like this. If you believe nothing else, believe that," he said. Menma stared at him, judging the weight of his words. "Why would you rather die than see this vision of yours come to life?" he asked him, truly confused by his brother's motives. "It's simple, Menma," he said, running his hand through his hair. "This world is not for me. I don't mean that in a spiteful way, I mean it in a literal sense. He looked around, unable to find the words. I'm a knight with no day. An antagonist with no true opponent. Menma was completely confused now. He didn't know what he was saying. Naruto said, bored, Menma, after seeing the confusion on his face. I have become bored with this dull existence. Excitement ended for me many years ago. Had I the chance, I would have ended myself a long time ago. Sadly for you, I was prevented from doing so and instead had time to think over the direction this world is taking. I decided to intervene on the cusp that this world may someday become complete again. I don't have to see it for it to do so. So you're happy that you won't even be alive to see it? Menma asked in shock. He asked him, what if it doesn't happen? Naruto smirked. Regardless if it does or not, I have started something new, something much more lasting, he said as he picked up the remaining half of his shattered mask that was conveniently nearby. This mask here, Menma, this means something. There is a reason I never named it, for it will have many names in the years to come, he said with a smile. This was more than just a way to hide my face. This mask is nothing more than the idea that order is dangerous. The next person who wears it may have a different plan, but their goal will always be the same, to upset the established order. Menma finally found the strength to get to his feet. When he looked at Naruto across the way, he saw that he wasn't all there either. Just like I'm here to stop you, someone else will do the same, he said, taking a stand. No matter what you think, there are good people, and there always will be good people. With his breathing still slightly faster than usual, Naruto stepped forward. Believe what you will, Menma, or believe the truth, he said, rushing forward as fast as he could. Menma also moved quickly and dove under Naruto's crazy haymaker. He tried to counter with a right hook, but Naruto caught his fist and used his arm to flip him over. Menma landed on his feet and ducked beneath the kick aimed for his head. By moving back, he was able to avoid the follow-up that slipped by him. Acting quickly, he flew in and hit Naruto in the face with a punch that actually hit. He tried to follow up, but his next punch was dodged and he was kicked in the knee, dropping him down. Before he could recover, Naruto spun around and kicked him directly in the face, sending him flying back. Before Naruto could get to him, Menma got back on his feet. He tried to tackle him out of desperation, but as soon as he got close enough, Naruto kneed him in the face. His head snapped back painfully and he clenched his eyes shut. Naruto stood back and watched him while he healed. Menma took the opportunity and shook the dizziness from his head. Blinking a few times, he groaned and rushed again. Naruto dodged his two brawler-style punches and stabbed him twice in the stomach. Menma hunched over and used his forearms to block the knee that came up. He got up and skillfully faked a right hook so that he could land a back kick. Naruto was thrown to the ground and before he could get up, Menma mounted him and began beating him repeatedly. Naruto seemed to let it happen as he just put his hands out to the side. The hits grew harder and harder as Menma tried to finish the fight right now. Before the next hit could land, Naruto swung forward and hit Menma at the bottom of his clenched fist, hurting his fingers. Menma's lapse in focus allowed Naruto to hit him in the throat before delivering a headbutt. Menma fell back and off of the redhead. Naruto got to his feet and kicked Menma back down before he could get up. He walked around to his front and grabbed his hair. He pulled him to his feet and hit him in the middle with a series of punches. Menma once again hunched over in pain. With his head down, Naruto somersaulted and brought the back of his foot down to the back of Menma's head, slamming him into the floor. Both of them laid down in the mud. Naruto was looking up at the sky, where it was still raining, and Menma had his face in the brown mud. Naruto took a few breaths before he rolled over painfully. Menma got to his feet just like he did, which was a surprise. Naruto groaned and hit him in the gut. Menma took the blow and hit him in the face with a punch. Naruto came back and returned the favor. Menma yelled at him and tried to hit him twice, but both times he missed. He felt Naruto sink down and poke his legs, but he didn't realize it until he tried to move forward. Both of his legs gave out and he hit his knees in confusion. While on his knees, he tried for a desperate swing, but Naruto dodged it and quickly jabbed at two specific points on his arm. The appendage fell limp to his side. He groaned and hesitantly lifted the other fist. He threw it forward in a lazy way, with no confidence at all. Naruto grabbed his wrist and kneed the back of his elbow, breaking the appendage. "All I ever wanted was for you to get it," he said as he looked at his lifeless body. Menma just stared at the ground in front of him, accepting defeat. "That's what this was about, pulling you from the ignorance you were living in." Menma rolled his head back. "Maybe I liked it that way," he said in a low voice. Naruto had a laugh. "Heh, of course you did. But change was coming regardless. They would have waited for Toussaint and perhaps Kakashi to die off before they made their move," he said, still speaking about this so-called revolution. You don't get it, Menma said, almost laughing at the irony. Heh, you're so smart, but you can't figure it out. Naruto just waited, not sure what he meant. Konoha is a country based on trust, family, and friendship. We don't fight for power like you say we do. The Uchiha clan has always been close to our family. The words of a traitor won't change how I see them, especially given his track record. Naruto shook his head. Menma, I couldn't get you to understand. You're too stubborn for that. For a long time, I thought I was like that character in Jiraiya's book just because we had the same name. In reality, it's you, he said between sobs. You have faith in your people. I am telling you now, Menma, that faith is misplaced, and if you're not careful, those civilized people of yours, they'll eat each other. Wink. Menma just smiled and shook his head. No, Naruto, I'm sorry I couldn't get you to understand. You've lived your whole life disliking people. When you met Itachi, it was like a breath of fresh air. When he was taken away, it was like someone ripped the air right out of your body. Naruto looked at him in confusion. Touching, but wrong, he said with a small chuckle. No, when he was taken away, it was like giving sight to the blind. I started to see the world for what it was. I started to see everything the way it was meant to be, not the way they said it was, he said, again making Menma angry with his strange language. I got one eye that day, and in a kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, he said, holding his arms close to his sides. Everything within him was possibly broken at this point. Menma remained silent, his mind trying to tell him whether he should believe him or not. There was no solid answer in his heart that he could lean to. If he were to believe this, he would be incriminating Sasuke, his best friend and newly made brother-in-law. What would Mito think? Where would she stand if this whole thing actually came to fruition? He looked up to the eyes of his brother and for some reason, believed him wholeheartedly. It was only when he looked away did he doubt his words. People today are weak, he said out of nowhere. There are thousands of shinobi in each village, he said, stressing the word thousands the second time he said it. And look what I could do with just a few hundred men and a paper bomb. There were many things I could have done. I could have taken each village's most beloved person and executed them with another nation's headband on. I could have disrupted the order of the mission income. That seems to do it. All those are great and all for starting a war. But that's not what I did, he said. No, I proved a point. Even the individuals tasked with the lives of thousands are no different than me. A series of bad events, and they're at the doorstep of madness. So, when you call me a freak, or a psychopath, or whatever else you want, I urge you to look across that battlefield at your fellow Cage. Watch that madness play out within their eyes and tell me how wrong I am. Menma leaned back and looked up at the sky. Just now, Naruto's true goals became clear. Even though they were told a lot of lies, he knew this was real. That was his plan all along, to prove the point that everyone was just like him. He wasn't trying to convince anyone but himself of that point. Now, Menma understood. This whole ploy, this entire game was just a way to prove his own sanity before he died. You're right, Menma said with exhaustion lacing his tone. Naruto looked at him and grabbed his hurt body, but he didn't have any chakra left to heal himself. You're not insane, Menma said, seemingly understanding. Everyone has been telling you that, maybe since Itachi died, but you're not. I would have done the same thing in your situation, he said, looking through the trees. Naruto chuckled and stepped closer to him. Menma shut his eyes, believing this to be the end. Then, as if he were remembering something, Naruto rubbed his head. There you go, buddy, now you get it, Naruto said, and then he walked past him and out of the trees. Menma remained in his spot, not that he could move much anyways. Those words, he remembered them so clearly. Back when, sitting on the couch in between Naruto's legs, Menma stared at the pictures on the page of the book in front of him. Mito was looking as well, and she was leaning on Naruto's shoulder. Naruto read. Then, when it looked like everything was lost, the prince flew back in and used his shield to block the dragon's fierce fire breath. Menma smiled in excitement. The princess thanked him and asked for his sword. When he gave it to her, they waited for the dragon's fire breath to run out before attacking. The prince let the princess get on top of his shield, and he threw her up towards the monster. With one strike of her powerful sword, she cut off his head. Naruto said triumphantly, and the two 4-year-olds yelled in amazement. Yeah, that was so cool, Nyai-san, Menma said, turning around to look him in the eyes. Naruto smiled at him and nodded his head. The princess was the best, said Mito with pride. She killed the dragon. Of course, Menma protested. No, she only killed him because the prince let her. He yelled in the defense of his favorite character. Naruto laughed at their stupid fight, but he didn't stop them. Instead, he found a new book to read while they fought. It was a much more difficult book with words that Naruto himself probably shouldn't know at this age. Sometime soon, Menma snuck up next to him to see what he was reading. His eyes locked onto the title written in bold letters at the top of every page. He tried to sound it out, Convolutwr. Naruto made a funny face and shook his head. He told him, it says Convoluted War Menma. He was wrong. Menma opened his mouth in a silent O and a nod. Suddenly, he asked, what does that mean? Naruto brought the book down to think about that. He knew what it meant, he just didn't know how to explain it. It means hard to understand, complicated, I guess, he said, realizing that he had just used an even harder word to explain what it meant. Menma also saw this and asked, well, what does that mean? Naruto chuckled and rubbed his head in thought. It means the same thing, Menma, he said with a shake of his head. Hard to understand. Like using big words, he said, describing it in a simple way. Naruto really liked what he saw. He sort of got it. Yeah, he said, staring at him in surprise. He made a mess of his hair. When his mom called them for dinner, he said, there you go, buddy, you got it. Menma smiled and ran away, shouting to his mom that he had learned a new word. Naruto shook his head and put away the book. Naruto stood on the edge of a cliff and looked out at the sea. It looked so beautiful right now. It looked just like what he had been fighting for. The chaos of the waves finding unison among the ocean's surface. No one forcing it to be something it was not, no one commanding it. It was free. When he heard footsteps running toward him, he thought it was his mother. He turned his head just a little and saw that she was coming at him with a sword, ready to kill him. He gave a soft smile and closed his eyes. He turned back toward the sea and waited patiently for the blade. Each footstep like a timer counting down the inevitable. He was happy about this time. His short life was almost peaceful for a few more seconds before it ended. His existence was so much smaller than he hoped it would be, but such is life. The footsteps were just behind him now, still charging with conviction and sorrow leaking from the source. Just as the last footstep ended behind him, so did everything else. Naruto opened his eyes, realizing he was not impaled or decapitated yet. He could hear what sounded like snickering over the rain. Peeking back slowly, he saw the top of his mother's head, hiding her eyes from his view. What's more, he saw the blade in her hands, trembling as it pointed towards his back. It was clear that she wasn't snickering to hide her laughter. He completely turned around and stared at the woman as her body shook with sadness and regret. He looked at her and thought about how weak she looked at that moment. There was a time when she was without a doubt the strongest woman he knew. Now what was she? A person who gives into pain. We are nothing but a bag of flesh and bones stuffed into the hell that is our emotions. Even after everything I've done, you hesitate, he said in pure confusion. It wasn't exactly pleasant, but he expected to die in that moment. He was sure that his mother would kill him. He kidnapped her granddaughter and murdered her husband. What more could he do to warrant hatred on an unparalleled scale? Kushina's face wouldn't turn up, and it looked like a supernatural force was holding her arms back so she couldn't thrust the sword forward. Tears leaked from her vehemently crying visage. Her entire body shook and she couldn't make it stop. I see. She couldn't even choke out her words. They refused to leave her mouth. Naruto watched the conflict within her heart play out. When she had to choose between getting even and getting better, her heart wouldn't tell her what to do. This was how hard life was. She yelled, I in a way that was so sad it sounded like a laugh. I see, can't do it, she yelled out finally. I can't do, she said, opening her mouth in a silent scream. As he looked down at her, the sword was still aimed at his bare chest. No one would hear what she said for a long time. She couldn't talk because her tears wouldn't let her. She clenched her eyes so tightly, praying that when she finally opened them, this would be all over and she'd be sitting at the dinner table with her entire family, including Naruto. She and Minato would serve the plates and listen to Mito and Menma arguing while Naruto read his book aloud to the grandchildren who would listen intently. That was all she ever wanted. Was it selfish of her to want something so lovely? Before she knew it, she could feel her sword shake, as if someone were grabbing it. It moved around and pushed against her a little. Her eyes remained clenched and her body continued to tremble beyond her control. The rain beat down on her with a vengeance, but for some reason she couldn't hear it. She couldn't hear anything but a soft thud. It was a really soft thud, having a steady beat. Bum bum, bum bum. Opening her eyes slightly, she saw nothing more than the blade, piercing the bare chest of her son. He wrapped his right hand tightly around the bottom of it, not caring that it was cutting into his hand. Her forehead was resting just above where his heart would be. As she held on to the handle of the sword, the tears kept coming and even got worse. Slowly, his other hand appeared and gently covered hers. He gently took her hands off the blade, but it was still stuck in his body. He took a small step back, as if to see what would happen. Then, he took a few more. Kushina was stunned as she watched him move away from the edge. When her eyes met his, she saw in an instant how much more like his old self his eyes were. It could have been the real smile he gave her. She wanted to reach out and grab him right now more than anything. Tell him that everything will be fine by the next day. Promise him that nothing bad would ever happen to him, and that she would always be there for him. How crazy would that be? Naruto smiled at her again and slowly moved away from her while holding on to the sword's blade. Goodbye, Kasen, he said slowly. Just like that, he fell back. Kushina lost sight of him when he disappeared among the edge of the cliff. That would be the last time she heard him call her that, even though she lost the right to such a title many years before. Kushina dropped to her knees and covered her mouth before the scream that rested at the back of her throat was released with the air she took in. She lost him twice, this time for good. Why did it hurt so much more when it happened again? Before she knew it, Menma was holding her in a comforting hug from behind, guessing what happened by the blood running down with the rain. He shut his eyes and mourned the loss of his brother, a man who lived in the darkness of his own mind and was called crazy for half of his life. Even after all this, he still loved him. This really shows how complicated and tied together human emotions are. That was his brother, but he would never see him again. What's worse, he couldn't even decide how he wanted to remember him. As he was when he didn't know anything, or as he really was. Regardless, he still had family to care for. After helping his mother stand up, they left. Their tears were washed away by the rain. When they got to the shore, Menma saw a boat waiting for them that he hadn't seen before. He wasn't sure where it came from, but he took it anyway. Naruto stared up to the surface of the water as he sunk deeper and deeper. The water even looked beautiful from down here. It was just a lot darker. He could only hear the shaking of the water as the rain fell on top of it. His whole life started to come back to him all at once. Even though it wasn't much, it gave him a taste of life and a sense of death, both of which he has felt many times before. This was the last time for a very long time. His pain was gone, he was no longer struggling, and he had finished what he had set out to do. He threw a stone into the still water of the pond where they lived. Over time, that first stone would inspire others to do the same, until the world was back to how it was supposed to be. A world without limits, a world of fairness, a world of chaos. Slowly, his vision began to blur. His eyes started to close, and he could feel the end coming. He couldn't wait to see the world again because it was so beautiful. His eyes opened again. He was now standing back on the cliff, watching the boat his mother and brother left on as it drifted away in the boat he placed there just a few moments ago. His mask back in place and unscathed. When he thought about what had happened, it made him smile. Even though he seems emotionless, his clones definitely have their own thoughts. Even knowing what they are, they tend to get emotional towards the end of their life. He watched his two family members leave, praying they heard his words. The world he sought would spell bad news for them if they didn't, but he knew that regardless of anything he said, Menma heard him. He had a family to care for. Even if he didn't fully believe him, that feeling of unease was put in his heart. The roots of rebellion ran deep through the heart of Konoha. When the world was tossed into war once more, Menma would be ready. He had faith in him. As he stood there in the rain, staring out to the blur of the distance, no longer able to see the boat, a thin hand slithered up to his shoulder. Ino put her mask on top of her head and rested her temple on his shoulder as they both looked out to sea. She said with a smile, "You really should have given my clone more chakra." Naruto laughed and took his own off. He kissed her lips and said, "Oh, I think you did fine with what you had." She smiled at him with doubt and shook her head. "Yeah, okay," she said in a sly way. Naruto just gave her a shrug when she didn't seem convinced. He turned her around and put his hands on her hips and said, "Well, Dr. Yamanaka." Ino gave him a smile and put her arm around the back of his neck. He made her smile by saying, "I've got a bearskin rug date waiting for us wherever we go. Just tell us where, and we'll spend the rest of our lives watching this madness happen." Ino looked around and thought for a moment before giving a simple shrug. "Let's just get in the boat and float away," she said. "Wherever we land, that's where we'll stay. Dangerous, poetic, and reckless, but I love it," he said, leaning forward and pecking her lips gently. He told her, "Let's go lose our minds," and she laughed. "One more thing, mister," she told him as she took his mask off. She also took hers off and tied them off with a piece of ninja wire through the eye holes. She kissed Naruto's forehead and said, "For the next psychopaths who fall in love." She then threw them into the ocean and let the waves carry them away, leaving the next person who wears it up to fate. True to his plan, the world fell apart. When the remaining cage returned to their villages, they found them already reminiscent of war zones. It looked like they had been attacked by shinobi who didn't have any markings and a few rogues. It was out of the blue and left them all in bad shape. Even so, this didn't stop the cage from doing what they wanted to do. It only made them have to give in even more. Kuma was the first to attack. He went after Kiri, the only country that hadn't been hurt during the whole thing. While they were fighting, Suna went to get Iwa, who took the dead Cage's body and went to Konoha. Konoha was quickly attacked, and they fell apart even faster because they were thrown into a civil war. The clans went their separate ways and hid from each other. Menma and his family, which included his mother and sister, joined a few of the other clans because they knew they could count on a few of them. With the fall of Konoha, there was a rise in power among only Kumo, as everyone saw it as the second best and most likely to hold the top spot. So, Suna and Kiri worked together to bring Kumo down soon after. With them out of the way and Iwa essentially left in ruins, the last two remaining shinobi villages tore themselves apart. Kiri was the first to go down, but Suna didn't take long to follow. Everyone there that day had a new level of respect for the monster that had put them in this situation. Naruto Namikaze became a name that everyone knew, and the mask he wore became the symbol of a monster. Almost everyone who was there talked about what he did and made it sound bigger than it was. It moved quickly through the elemental nations, picking up speed as it went. In just 1 year, it was almost like an old story. A crazy story about psychological warfare on a scale that has never been seen before. There were a few attempts to start some kind of set civilizations, but they were all stopped by people who thought like Naruto, as if that was his plan. People who thought he was right in what he said. Chaos was new to them because everyone was treated the same way. As people were caught up in the hell around them, there was a lot of violence and bloodshed, but there was also a lot of unquestioned friendship. It was a world of freedom for all. As for the two pioneers from that time, they lived in Rice Country in a secret place. Their appearances drastically different from the way they used to be. Naruto had gone back to having blonde hair, and Ino had cut off the red tips. They looked a lot like they did a long time ago, when, in a way, things were worse. As new parents, they had a simple life. They made their own food and watched the world fall apart, just like they knew it would. It's crazy to think that everything began with just 1 or 2 books. A young boy who read a lot gained the will to change the world he knew was killing itself. Witnessing the so-called false gods was the fuel to his rage and their ignorance the match. He was the first one to throw a stone, but he knew he wouldn't be the last.
So this was the end of the series. I hope you enjoyed it. To watch more series like this, subscribe to my channel. Till then, we Weeb offline.